Hey, how's everybody doing? Hope you're having a fantastic day. It is Thursday, October 3rd, and we're in for an early one because this man right here.
Yeah.
Oh no, why does
Yeah.
it go like that? Okay. Anyways, this man right here, he lives in a monkey country, so his time zone is completely differently. So we have to do it earlier in the day. So we're having an early daytime stream. But how you doing, Astro?
I'm doing fine. How about you, Christian?
I'm doing fantastic. Hopefully you'll be continuing to do fine over the next few days because of world events. But yeah,
yeah,
you know, can't talk about that much, or we'll get taken down.
Exactly.
Because no reason whatsoever. There's no reason why this video would get taken down for talking about current world events, and there's nothing behind that whatsoever. But anyways, yeah, what are we doing today? We are looking at the video from Dr. Stephen Nimesh and Dr. Andani. They did a video against the Thomistic view of the Trinity and said that my video in particular, saying that we violate divine simplicity. So we're going to be reviewing that. I have to be out of here by 2:00. I have a meeting at 2. But beside that, we're just going to go through the video, review it. And yeah, so Astro, will you actually? Yeah, Brother Diamond posted about you. Yeah, so I can't even reply to it in the comments because Diamond has me blocked from his comments. So he commented on my original video and I replied to him there. So yeah, but yeah, thank you for letting me know. But Astro, what is in general the argument that they bring forward, and what is the general response from Thomists to the objection that they give? Because to my understanding, I'm playing dumb here, but to my understanding, this has been an objection that has been dealt with before. Is that correct? Has anybody in the history of the world dealt with the objection from divine simplicity in the Trinity?
Yeah, I mean, they give like 2 arguments in total. So one is law of identity, which we covered in our like 5-hour stream last week, and the other one is basically it's about production of the word and how it's basically quote unquote occurs in God and its impossibility, because apparently there are some quote unquote logical inconsistencies with the claim that a word can be produced and at the same time be God, because that would mean that God is at the same time unproduced and produced. And finally, they say that divine simplicity cannot.
Continue.
And then finally, they say that divine simplicity excludes God from having intellect. So we're gonna get into those 3 arguments, which have been like dealt with like since the time of St. Thomas, let's say the first phase of scholastics. And prior to scholastics, they were like a bunch of responses. But when we got to first phase of scholasticism, which was with St. Thomas, Bonaventure, Blessed Scotus, and all that, they all addressed these arguments. And in kind of diverse ways, I mean, all of them have similar responses, except the Scotus, his view is a bit different.
Yeah.
But the general outline is the same. Like they all have kind of similar response, although in different words. But here we're going to give what the Thomistic school thinks, basically. Yeah. Mhm.
So I think you should cover how you derive the definition of simplicity because Andani simply cites Plotinus as an authority.
Yeah.
Yeah, in particular, I mean, the reason why a opposed relation is not going to violate simplicity is because relation is not something that modifies the subject, but the order of a subject. So it's a modification which is towards another. That's the essay ad that we speak about. But really, I mean, it's quite simple. I think to refute because basically what you have to ask them is you have to ask them, okay, how give me the arguments that you use to conclude that God is simple, and then they can give the argument, and then you have to ask them, okay, well, does positing a trinity contradict this particular argument that you give? Because no matter what argument they give for simplicity, it always reduces to a conclusion which excludes any sort of union of opposites, which is not at all what we posit in the Trinity. It excludes any sort of absolute distinction, which, absolute real distinction, which we do not posit in the Trinity. So if they could show me an argument for divine simplicity that is going to somehow conclude that relative distinction, like we posit, is somehow impossible, then I would like to hear the argument. But yeah, that's basically how we would go about in a more intuitive way, rather than just stating our definition and then they state their definition back. But do you have anything else to say about that, Astro?
No, that was great. I only want to add one thing, and it's that so Dr. Nani, he's basically a Neoplatonist because Smileys are mostly Neoplatonists when it comes to to their doctrine of God.
Mm-hmm.
So we would, from a Thomistic point of view, we would actually like disagree with their view of simplicity because we think that that actually doesn't help God to be simple. Basically destroys it. Basically, we would argue that the Neoplatonic model takes away the perfection of God and almost is like tantamount to atheism. Basically, that's
Mm-hmm.
how we view it. So we would posit something completely different, and it's that you would say that these perfections are not set of God causally, meaning that when I say God is good, I don't mean, oh, God is good because God causes goodness. Or when I say God is knowing, I don't mean God causes knowledge in
Mm-hmm.
external things. I mean that there is actually a perfection in God Himself that exists in Him and makes Him capable of cognition and
Mm-hmm.
intellectuality. But that perfection, we say, is identical to divineness. So there's a big difference. One camp says there's no knowledge in God at all. It's just causal. It's just a causal relation.
Yeah.
And some people say it's completely just a negative view, which is like Maimonides' view. It's not even causal. It's just a negation. Like when I say God is knowing, that just means God is not dumb, basically.
Yeah.
So we disagree with both of those views, and we take a Dionysian and Salomean view, which is that these perfections truly exist in God. So they exist
Mm-hmm.
formally according to their own nature. So intellect, according to its own nature, implies the ability to cognize things. Will, according to its own formal reason, implies being like open to opposites. And all of these are perfectly preserved in God. They're positive predicates. They're not negative
Mm-hmm.
at all. But that they're not really distinct because of God's simplicity and eminence. They're all identical. So our simplicity completely differs. So when
Yeah.
people say, "Oh, well, we all believe in simplicity," no, actually, we don't. We would say
Mm-hmm.
that they're just like they would say our simplicity fails. We would say their simplicity fails. They see it
Mm-hmm.
as something that is against simplicity, meaning our doctrine, and we see it as something close to atheism and agnosticism when it comes to God. So our
Yeah.
doctrines completely differ. That's an important point that should be made here.
Yeah, and St. Thomas is very easy refutations of both of
Mm-hmm.
those views because
Yeah.
if we think of the attributes of God as merely something which is causal, then we
Mm-hmm.
would be able to say that God is good in as proper of a sense as we'd be able to say that God is a
Yeah.
body, or even
Yeah.
God is the entity of sin, or like a bunch of weird
Yeah.
things we would be able to say about God. And then with
Yeah.
negations, you can't have a purely negative um, way of doing theology because any negation is going to somehow rely on a more fundamental affirmation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So both of those views, viewing the divine attributes as mere negations rather than positive perfections, and also viewing the divine attributes as merely causal, both of those are completely wrong. And Saint Thomas threads the middle way very well. If you want to read more about that, I think the best treatment in this is actually in St. Thomas's Sentences commentary.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, distinction 2, right? Yeah, let me
Mhm.
see, distinction 2, and then all of those articles in distinction 2 are very good.
Mhm.
And then also, if you can read Latin, is Lectura Romana, which is his Roman lectures on the sentences. Distinction 2 in that is very good as well. I think it's honestly the best treatment. I've translated
Yeah.
into English somewhere on Twitter. If you search Lectura Romana on Twitter,
Yeah.
in like quotation marks, it'll
Mhm.
probably pop up because I'm sure I'm probably the only person talking about the Lectura Romana on Twitter.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can find that somehow later
Mhm.
and put it in the description. But yeah, is there anything else to? Oh, there's a few super chats. If God real, why bad? So real. Actually, if God not real, why good? Good
Yeah.
morning. Am I still banned? I unbanned everybody, so there are now no ban restrictions for anyone.
Christian, actually, what you said is what St. Thomas says in Summa Contra Gentiles. He basically says, oh, some philosophers say that there is evil, therefore there is no God. And then he says, quite the contrary. Because there is evil, there is God. Because privation of evil is a privation of good. But if there is good, then there has to be a God. It's just that simple.
So true. Yes, exactly. Perfect answer. I think the answer should focus on the proofs leading to God, to saying God is simple, and we negate any composition. Yeah, because you have to realize that, as Astro said, there are vastly different views of simplicity that
Yeah.
we're putting forward, and even slight distinctions within Catholics, such
Mhm.
as the three famous: the modal distinction, the virtual distinction, and the formal distinction.
Mhm.
Although, if you read the primary sources in a lot of these theologians, they're used quite interchangeably.
Yeah.
There's different terms. But there's actually like real difference between different types of theologians, and they really haven't. Dr. Namesh and Dr. Andani, neither of them actually go in this video and prove that their articulation of simplicity is the correct one, and therefore, from principles like I mentioned, which is okay, how are we proving a lack of composition in God, and what type of like what notion of composition is underlying that negation? Because if they were to
Yeah.
say that the Trinity requires composition, because simplicity is just the negation of composition. If they're saying that the Trinity requires composition, they have to demonstrate what the nature of composition even is in the first
Mhm.
place.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I don't think this is intentional. I think this is just the way that a lot of these discussions happen. But I think that this is more of a rhetorical move than anything, just to actually throw out the statement, the Trinity is uh, composite, or throw out this
Yeah.
violates simplicity. Throw out terms and individuals when they first hear of these terms, they kind of have a little bit of a freak out moment when they hear this,
Mhm.
and they don't really know the fundamental notions of what any of these things mean. So it's very hard to convince
Yeah.
somebody that the Trinity doesn't violate simplicity, not because
Mhm.
it's just so obvious that the Trinity violates simplicity, but the fact that these are some very abstract things, and everybody has a sort of intuitive notion of what simplicity means, which for most people, it's just there's no distinction. Like most people, if you ask them what divine simplicity is, especially on the internet, uh,
Mhm.
or even like in academic circles, they would literally say
Yeah.
something like,
Exactly.
"Oh, all of the names of God are synonymous." That's what simplicity means.
You know,
Which is
some
just
what
which is
some
just
say.
ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. Some
Yeah,
say, oh, simplicity means no attributes.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's just completely ridiculous what the average person's notion of
Yeah.
simplicity is. So obviously, if they're coming at this with that notion of simplicity, then when they look at the Trinity, it's going to be obvious that the Trinity just violates simplicity. But it's violating a false view of simplicity, a view that Rome is actually condemned. We've
Exactly. It's
condemned the
condemned.
idea that there are no attributes in God and all of them are
Mhm.
synonymous. That was condemned. That was what was the medieval philosopher?
Um, I know his name. Meister Eckhart.
No. Oh,
No.
Eckhart.
Yeah.
Oh, Eckhart.
Yeah. Eckhart. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
Eckhart.
yeah, yeah. It was
But
Eckhart.
some say he was misunderstood. But either
I
way,
think he was. I think he was
magisterium.
misunderstood, but that
Yeah.
doesn't really matter
Yeah.
because this was the
Yeah,
view that was
because
condemned. Yeah.
magisterium says this proposition itself is heretical, so it doesn't matter if
Mm,
it's his actual view or not. And Vatican I actually affirms a positive view of attributes. It says God is infinite in all of his perfections. But if it's causal, then it cannot be infinite because God's creatures are not infinite. So you cannot say God is infinite in will and knowing and all those perfections if these attributes are said to be causal, because an effect can never be infinite. So Vatican I would be saying nonsense, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, is that all for a prolegomena? Can anybody think of anything else that we should cover or mention before we get into the video?
I think I just want to add one more thing. I forgot that. So besides Maimonides and neo-platonic view of divine attributes, there's also another view which St. Thomas mentions, and that's Al-Ghazali's view, or the Sunni Ash'ari view, which is basically there are actually attributes in God, just like we say, but they say that these attributes are really distinct from one another and really distinct from the divine essence. And we reject that because that produces composition in God for us. So 3 views, all 3 rejected. So we are trying to find a middle view. Against against Plotinus and Maimonides, we say with Ghazali that there are actually attributes in God. And against Ghazali, we say with Plotinus and Maimonides that there are no real distinctions in God. So our view is a middle way, basically.
Yeah. You've seen Dr. Andani versus Jake the Muslim Meta Monkey. No, I actually haven't. Did you watch that, Astro?
I have. Yeah, and then he literally slaughtered Jake.
Yeah, that's a W.
And that's a bit, yeah.
Less Trent. I get that money, I'm a flex. Really? I get that money, I'm a flex. How do you like Western ads?
Yeah, they're terrible.
They're terrible.
Rocking with the best.
Okay, they're live. I don't think they get into this.
Don't join us for a discussion. We have Dr.
After like 7 minutes. 7 minutes.
7 minutes.
Yeah.
Cool. Oh wait, they start right. Oh yeah, but I'm not going to rewatch everything that I said myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! Come on.
I bet you didn't know this. In North Gaza,
there's your people.
After the conflict, some families are so
right
hungry
there.
They tie rocks around their waists to dull the pain of empty stomachs.
Crazy.
The devastation has left many without homes, food, or hope. At we are committed to changing this reality.
Yeah, but we're not allowed to say whose fault it is.
Yeah, we're not allowed to say that.
Okay, so yeah, here they start. I'm gonna put this at 1.25 speed since they're watching.
1.5 is better, I think, because they talk so slowly.
Do they talk so slowly?
Okay. Yeah.
They're not based gamers like we are, used to talking fast on stream.
Yeah.
Prove Trinity with math. I'll wait. Game over.
Okay, I'll prove it. 1 plus 1 plus 1.
1 plus 1 plus 1 equals
3.
Game over.
I think this is one of the points where especially you will want to press him, because if we admit the doctrine of divine simplicity, then we should not say that God has 2 faculties.
Okay, so Astro, does divine simplicity say that God does not have 2 faculties?
No, it does not say that. What we're saying is that when we consider this like intellect and will, which are those 2 faculties Christian mentioned in his video, those faculties are not really distinct. It doesn't mean that they're not virtually distinct. In fact, we believe that God is virtually multiple. That's what virtual distinction means. So let me give you an easy example of what virtual distinction is, so you will understand what we're saying when we're talking about a virtual distinction in God. So think of the solar power, okay? So the solar power, just simply, what it does is simply shining. It does nothing else besides shining. It simply shines, but in that shining, it contains the power of nourishing, power of lighting, power of heating, power of drying. So there are all these powers, there are all these activities contained within one simple activity of shining. Now, all of those powers and activities are one and the same thing in the sun, right? None of them are diverse because all of them are contained in the sun by virtue of that solar activity, which is simply to shine. But in us, those powers are really distinct. We need diverse powers to nourish, to heat up, to dry, to light up. So those are diverse powers in inferior creatures, but in the sun, but in solar activity, all of them are one. Namely, that solar activity of that simply act of shining that the sun does. So there's something in the sun, right, that is equivalent to multiple really distinct powers in us. What is really distinct in us is one and the same in the sun. In us, power to heat, power to dry, power to nourish, all of them are really distinct. We need diverse powers. But in the sun, all of them are the same by simply sun shining. That's all. So one power of the sun or one activity of the sun is equivalent to 4 really distinct powers, activities in us. That's what virtuality is. That's basically the foundation. Now, apply this to God. God exists. He's a simple essence. We have all these perfections: intellect, will, power, wisdom, justice, mercy, all of these perfections. Now, they are really distinct and diverse in us. Now, think of God's essence as the sun, right? So God's essence is of such eminence and perfection that what is diverse and really distinct in creatures, in us, is contained in him simply as one. Just like the sun's simply activity of shining contains all these powers which are real distinct in creatures as one. So that's the virtuality we're talking about. God's essence is virtually multiple because all these perfections that it contains, those perfections are really diverse in creatures, yet because of God's eminence, those perfections are contained in him as one. So essence is really one, but virtually multiple. Just like sun's shining is simply one, but virtually multiple, because in that shining, it has the power to nourish, it has the power to heat, it has the power to dry, it has the power to light up something. So that's what virtual multiplicity means. It's not real multiplicity, it's just a real multiplicity. And this enables us to speak of different attributes of God, which are not really distinct, but virtually distinct. So God has intellect, will, mercy, justice, power. All of these are virtually multiple in God, not really multiple. And that's why what Christian says is true, because virtually speaking, these two faculties, intellect and will, are virtually distinguished. So it makes sense for us to speak of them as two, even though in reality they are one.
Yeah. So 62% said they don't understand what you just said.
Oh my goodness. I wasn't paying attention.
No, I was paying attention. They weren't.
Okay.
Yeah, so basically they have no idea what a virtual distinction is. I don't know, it seems pretty intuitive to me that there is a distinction which is neither a real distinction, which is a distinction between realities before the consideration of the intellect, and a merely nominal distinction, which is just different names for the same idea. Yeah, so...
Wait, did nobody understand what I said? Can you guys confirm? Did nobody understand?
No, I asked a poll. I put a poll in, and it's 50-50. I could live with 50-50.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I mean,
I can live with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Explain the fundamentum in re.
Yeah, that's what I explained, basically. That was the fundamentum in re. So
yeah. So basically, there's a twofold dependence to a virtual distinction. It's not only that the perfection of the object has a multitude of perfections which are contained under one in a unified reality, but also the fact that our mode of knowing is somehow lesser. So, for example, this is a helpful way of thinking about it, and this actually helpfully allows us to distinguish between the formal distinction and the virtual distinction. So, for Thomists, we think that when we have the beatific vision and we know God as He is, that we will actually be able to apprehend all of His various different perfections under one aspect. So the example that St. Thomas uses, and I have, if you look up divine simplicity videos on me or divine naming videos or whatever, I've done this or distinctions or class distinctions, done stuff like this a million times. Basically, the example I use is if you have a king, the king is the supreme power. The kingly power is one and united. The king doesn't have multiple different powers. He just has one kingly power that he's given. but he can share this power amongst various ministers. So let's say you have a king and he starts a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. He is participating the kingly power in multiple different ways. Now, the judicial power, the legislative power, and the executive power, those aren't three powers in the king. Those are one power. It's all contained under the supreme perfection of the kingly power. But when he shares it in a multiplicity of ways. So in a similar way, we don't have access to that supreme power of the king. We only have access to the limited powers of his ministers. So we know truth, and we know goodness, and we know justice, and we know mercy, and we know all of these different perfections. But God has all of the God has all of the perfective aspects in all of these perfections in a unified and united way. If that does that make more sense? Okay. So a minor and major virtual distinction. Do you want to explain this?
Is it? Oh, that's trendy. Oh, Kalman, that's based. So a major virtual distinction is a distinction of reason with a foundation in reality, but that foundation is in the manner of excluding and excluded, like genus and species. Okay, like animality and rationality. So animality and rationality are distinct virtually from each other as excluding and excluded. So by the fact, because of the fact that you have animality, it does not follow that you're going to have rationality necessarily. So it's not because it's not a real distinction, but it's a virtual one. On the other hand, there's a minor virtual distinction, which is basically the same distinction of reason with a foundation in reality, but it's after the manner of implicit and explicit. So divine essence has all these perfections, but only like when we say the name divine essence, we don't explicitly name all these perfections. Or the difference of transcendentals. So transcendental properties of goodness, being, unity, reality, all of them are one and the same. When you say something exists, you say something is good at the same time, because goodness and being are convertible. But there is a distinction of reason with a foundation in reality, because you're considering them from two different aspects. In one sense, you're saying that the thing exists insofar as it's active being. In another sense, when you say it's good, you mean that it has the aspect of desirability. So that's why they are said to be distinct. I hope that helps.
Yeah, and for a question like this, is there one self or three selves in God? These type of questions are just not helpful because it depends on how you're apprehending self or selves. If you mean subject, is there one subject or three subjects in God? There's three subjects in God, which is evident, especially from the incarnation. But yeah, using terms like self or selves, that could be taken in a psychological sense. And then in that case, obviously, there's one intellect, will, mind, whatever you want to say, in God. So there's not three selves. But if you just mean subjects, then yes, there is three selves. But again, this is just not a helpful way of thinking about it, because this isn't it's a very imprecise question to ask. And two, this just isn't the traditional language that we speak in. So yeah, that's is the fundamentum in re extramental? Yes. The extramental foundation is the supreme perfection of the thing. So it's something which, again, as I said, there's a twofold foundation. There's a foundation in the thing, and there's a foundation in us.
Yeah.
And neither one of those on their own is sufficient to establish virtual distinction. They need to both be present. The thing needs to be higher than our intellects, and our intellects need to be lower than the thing, or at least the medium in which we know things needs to be lower, which is by our senses now.
That's why you say that God himself does not make a virtual distinction between his attributes, because although in God there's a foundation in re in God, but there's not a weakness of intellect, because God's intellect is not weak.
Mm-hmm.
He apprehends everything by a simple gaze, basically. So one foundation, basically one aspect of a virtual distinction is lacking, so we cannot say that God himself makes these distinctions. But in us, there is both the foundation in reality, which is God himself, and the weakness of our intellect. So we can say that, there is virtual distinction. And same with the blessed. Because the blessed in heaven seen the word, they do not make a virtual distinction. between God's attributes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then the names of God are virtually distinct. Okay, but anyways, let's move on. I hope that is a good enough preface, because it's basically going to be a misunderstanding of what we mean by simplicity that's going to drive all of this.
Of immanent action, he is just one pure and simple act. We should not say that God has two faculties of immanent action. He is just one pure and simple act. And there may be different ways that we try to make sense of God's one and simple act. There may be different concepts that we apply to God, or pictures that we create in our mind for applying to God. But strictly speaking, in God, there is no plurality. There's just the one reality that he is.
Yeah, but he contains the perfection of each one of those concepts, though, in a
so what
sublime manner. That's what we mean. That's what we mean to say.
Yeah,
it's not like we say intellect and will, and we're like imposing this in such a way as to like make up names. No, he has the perfections of intellect and will, and that's why we apply them to him, because he has these perfections. Yeah.
And so here it seems to me, and you might agree, that Christian is taking for granted something, some sort of distinction in God that is not actually there, and that
I really don't think that Nimesh has any like solid reading in our tradition, because we say something completely different than what he's saying right now that we hold.
Will undermine his approach.
Oh, come on.
If you're
what the hell?
And you
it's the third act.
Clap your hands. If you're happy.
You do clap your hands, and she. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, she doesn't have a hand. Okay, let's skip this.
Yes, I would. That when I heard this last night, and I think I sent you a message about this. That was my first thought. So if we say God has two faculties, but God is simple, God cannot have two faculties, right? At most, you could say God has one faculty, but then divine simplicity would force you to further say that God's faculty is identical to God. So you're just
something could be identical yet distinct. We just went over this.
Say God has two faculties, divine simplicity would reduce it to simply saying,
because identical is being taken in two senses. Identical is being taken in one way in a formal sense, the other way in a material sense. When and by formal and material, I mean by formal the aspect of something wherein we know that thing, and by material I mean the entity. So, like, for example, like materially speaking, the square root of 16 and 2 squared, materially speaking, these are identical because they both equal 4. But formally speaking, they're distinct from one another. So it would be just as incorrect to say, oh well, there is no distinction between 2 squared and the square root of 16. Like that would be completely ridiculous, even though like entitatively there's an identity in the conclusion of the mathematical symbols. So it's just they'll make this illicit transfer. They do it all the time. They do it with the Leibniz rule and the abuse of Leibniz rule, which is funny because Leibniz actually agrees with our reading of his rule and actually gives the same defense of the Trinity in relation to his rule. But it goes from the terms materially taken to the terms formally taken. And they do an illicit transfer between these two. Eventually, I'm going to write something about this. I think I've wrote notes about this before, but this is like very basic logic, is that you don't want equivocation in any of your syllogisms. You want only 3 terms, not 4 terms. But they always have 4 terms in their syllogisms that they work against us because they move between the term materially taken and the term formally taken. It happens all the time. So they're just a mass of equivocations and fallacies when they argue against. But did you have anything to say about this?
No, and I would just like to add that sometimes when they make an argument against the Trinity, each of these premises are valid taken in themselves, but when you compare them, like premise 2 does not follow from premise 1. So let's say in premise 1 it's taken materially, but in premise 2 they change it formally, for example. So in themselves, like, those premises are valid, but they don't follow from each other, and that's why all of these arguments are coming from, and they're easily refutable. It's not really hard to refute these, and they actually make the same mistake later on in the video where it says oh, if Father is identical to God and Son is identical to God, but they're opposed to each other, then doesn't that mean divine essence is opposed to divine essence? Which is the same mistake. we have pointed out many times, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, and if you want to just search the channel in Pure Act or Modal Collapse or something like that,
Yeah,
there's a
modal
clip
collapse,
about it.
classic answers. I've responded
Yeah.
to that.
What's the created uncreated issue that Dyer always says? Claims it debunks the Catholic view of the Trinity and the Incarnation due to essence energy. I don't think he makes that claim about the Trinity, right? He makes a claim about the knowability of God. Is that correct, Astro?
It's been a while, but he basically says, you know that guy who was on our live stream, he basically tried to argue the same. Oh, if God's essence is his being, then since we know God's being, but we don't know his essence, then they cannot be identical. So he makes that. He got it from Dyer actually. And when it comes to incarnation, says, oh, how can an absolute simple essence become incarnate? Which is like we have responded to like a billion times.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are his critiques.
Yeah, I thought he was talking about created versus uncreated grace as well, but
Yeah.
he's asking about the Trinity and the Incarnation. So yeah, I mean, I could answer the thing about created versus uncreated grace if that's what he, that's what he's asking. Oh yeah, in Unius, go in Unius Initiative. He has a clip of Astro talking about this. Yeah, everybody subscribe to Unius Initiative. It's very good. Okay, so let's. Okay. This is a great question. They bring this up later, but I actually directly deal with this in the video. So this is actually it's so annoying that they bring forward this later in the video too, because obviously, Gabriel, I'm not saying like you're an idiot or anything for this is a very natural and actually very good thought for you to have, because that means that you're understanding what we're saying. So that's a very good thought for you to have. This is actually a basis for a very big dispute between the Scotus and the Thomists, because the Scotus say that the Filioque, is not necessary to distinguish the Son and the Spirit. That is that the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. But the Thomists do say it's necessary. So why is this? Well, the Scotus believe in the formal distinction. So the Scotus can actually ground the distinction between the Son and the Spirit on the basis of the fact that they proceed from formally distinct faculties. So that's how they argue against what we say of its necessity. But the Thomists respond, well, the faculties are only virtually distinct. So the mode of procession does not adequately distinguish the persons. Rather, there needs to be a relation of opposition. So when we talk about the will and the intellect, we don't say that their mode of procession is sufficient for distinguishing them. If there was no relative opposition between the Son and the Spirit, we would absolutely agree that they would collapse into a single person. But we do agree that we do posit that there is a relative distinction between the Son and the Spirit, insofar as the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. There's active spiration present and really identical to the Father and the Son, and passive spiration, which constitutes the Spirit. Does that make sense?
No, you're asking me or the person who asked that question?
No. Oh, sorry, I was asking the person who was asking.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, Dr. Andani's in chat. How's it going, Dr. Andani?
Oh.
I'm here. My argument for neo-platonic simplicity is given in my Jake debate, which I call the attributes collapse problem. This applies to the divine processions. Sorry, I didn't watch the debate, but Astro, you watched the debate. Is there any?
I have, but I don't remember this part of debate. I'm sorry.
Okay, so sorry about that. Maybe we'll have to make a note to talk about that at a different time.
God is himself. That's it. So I'm not sure. And again, if somebody says, well, the intellect and will of God are only distinct for creatures, I would say, okay, but then that's just a distinction in creaturely minds, in our creaturely concepts. But in extramental reality, God cannot be said to have two faculties, one intellect and one will. So yeah, I would agree with that. But again, from what's going to happen in the video is that Christian is going to say that by virtue of these two faculties, and I don't know what kind of distinction he's going to have to posit for them, but they can't have a real distinction, you are going to have two emanations, which is the foundation. He calls it procession. So if we rewind it back, he actually had a good sort of thing over here. So the foundation for what's going to be these relations or persons in God, the foundation are processions. So God has two immanent processions, right? That's what he's saying. So I sort of tried to diagram this out, and I'll put this on here. So, and this is actually how I sort of teach it. So you have a divine essence that's absolutely simple.
Yeah, could you explain, Astro, the one self thing? Because scholastics don't talk about this, but from my understanding, it's pretty common in the modern analytical literature.
Yeah, I think this has to do with like one self, three selves, Trinity model. So like those who fall into social Trinitarian camp, they basically multiply anything in God except the essence. So anything that comes, like mind, quote unquote, consciousness, will, power, everything is multiplied by three because there are three persons, and they just keep essence basically one there, and they multiply everything, and that's termed three selves model or the social model. And then the one self model is basically termed latent Trinitarian model, which is that everything is numerically one except the distinction of three persons.
The Latin model.
Yeah.
That's where William Lane Craig gets it.
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm gonna go into his explanation.
So, and this is actually how I sort of teach it. So you have a divine essence that's absolutely simple. That there's no parts, and again, if God is absolutely simple, as far as I'm concerned, there should be no distinctions internal to God.
Okay, so when it comes to, we talked about this earlier,
Yeah.
but simplicity is a negation. It's wait, you think, do you you agree that simplicity is merely a negative name, right, Astro, or do you disagree with that?
Okay. I read Blaze of the Conception, his commentary on the oh my goodness, I lost the train of my thought. Oh yeah, Blaze of the Conception. He basically wrote a Solomon Chansey's commentary on philosophy, the metaphysics disputation, basically. So metaphysics was up to him, and he discusses this, and he says, except Kaitan, everybody says that it's actually positive perfection as well. So,
Well, I'm a Cajetanist, so
yeah,
I think it's a
probably,
negative name.
yeah.
So you said positive perfection.
Yeah, actually, okay. I'm not gonna say
Mhm.
what he says because I don't recall it, so I don't want to give a
Because
wrong
I
response.
thought I remembered you remembering
Yeah,
that you differed from the
yeah,
teaching of the great commentator. But anyways,
yeah.
it's a negative name, and that's what it's negating something, whether it's a positive or negative perfection. So it's negating composition. And what is composition? Well, composition isn't having distinction. That's not composition.
Yeah.
So we can have a multiplicity of names. We can have virtual distinction, which, as we already went over that in a lot of detail earlier, or we can actually have relative distinction. So, what's the reason why we could have a relative distinction? Well, it's because when it comes down to relations imply relative opposition, and relative opposition means that the distinction is not somehow united. So the Father, insofar as he is Father, and the Son, insofar as he is Son, under that formal aspect, and not materially taken, but under that formal aspect, there's relative opposition. So when it comes to paternity and filiation, there's opposition and real distinction. Now, if we said somehow that, like, you have paternity and filiation, and then they're united under that aspect to one another, then you would have composition. But we hold that they are really distinct subjects. So you can't actually, since we do not posit that unity under that aspect, there can't be even composition there. It would be just as weird as talking about composition between you and your father. Um, yeah, so it doesn't matter that the SAN of both are numerically identical. That's not relevant to the question at hand, but rather whether they are united under that aspect, which we don't posit that they are. So, formally speaking, it may sound extremely strange. Again, it may sound weird. I'll concede that, but formally speaking, this does not contradict simplicity due to the definition of simplicity laid out. Is that do you have anything else to add, Astro?
Yeah, I have quite a bit to add. So, since Dr. Nani is here, so we do not believe that simplicity is a negation of real distinctions, and we're basically contradicting ourselves. We say that simplicity is a negation of composition, and the real distinction we posit does not produce composition, so we say we can have it. Now, you might say, okay, if you can have a real distinction of persons, then why can't Ash'ari say we have a real distinction of attributes? Well, the difference is this. So you know well that in Aristotle's categories, there are substance and nine accidents, and some of the accidents like quality. Okay, let's say quality. So power, knowledge, will, all of these are signified by the mode of quality, accidental quality. They're not relations, they're in the predicate of quality, right? So let's say there's a distinction, real distinction between knowledge, will, power, and God's essence. So substance and that quality. If there's that distinction and quality subsists in that substance, then either that quality is distinct from because it's not really identical, then it's either really distinct from the essence and at the same time separate, or really distinct and inseparable. So in other words, let's say the Ash'ari view, which says attributes are really distinct from God's essence, there's only two options. Either they're saying that they're really distinct while being at the same time inseparable, or that they're really distinct and separate. If they're really distinct and separate, then that's a multitude of gods, right? That's Ta'addud al-Ghudama, which Islamic philosophers talk about against Ash'aris. And if the second, which is that attributes are real distinct but at the same time inseparable, then that's composition, because they are united together, even though they're real distinct. And so because they're united and at the same time really distinct, that's composition, because the definition of composition philosophy is the union of really distinct things or extremes. Not just real distinction, simply speaking, but the union of really distinct things. So attributes cannot be really distinct, because if they're really distinct, right, either they're real distinct and separate, which is multiple gods, or they're really distinct and inseparable, which means a composition in God. But why is it that relations can be real distinct but produce no composition at the same time? Well, this is why. So a relation, just like the predicate of quality, it has being in something. So just like quality is in something as an accident and a subject, so is relation. So relation exists as an accident and subject before doing its proper function, which is being a relative entity referring to its correlative, like father to the son. So we have this relationship of paternity in God, okay? Relationship of paternity is not really distinct from the divine essence, okay? So unlike Ash'aris, we do not say that attributes and essence are distinct. In the same way, we say that relations and essence are the same, one and the same thing. So relation is identical to divine essence. And this is relation insofar as it is in something, because in order for relation to exist, it has to be in something before referring to something. So relation is identical to God's essence. Therefore, there's no composition, because where there's real identity, there can be no composition. They're the same in reality and distinct virtually. Now we get to relation's proper function, which is to refer to its correlative. Now, correlative of paternity or fatherhood is sonship or filiation. So fatherhood in relation to a son is opposed to it, and thus really distinct. But their real distinction is not sought from a union of father and the son, but from their opposition. Okay, so they're really distinct because of opposition. They're not really distinct because there are two things which come and unite themselves. Okay, so the relation, unlike other predicates, can exist in God and can make real distinction without any composition. Because relation, unlike predicate of quality, quantity, action, passion, not only is in something but also towards something. So as insofar as it is in something, it subsists as an accident and subject, which is in creatures. But in God, it won't subsist as an accident and subject, because in God they're really identical. Okay? But insofar as it is a relation, which is a reference to another, it does not produce any composition as well, because it's just opposition and real distinction, not union and real distinction. So, to reply to the argument, we say that Trinity of persons does not imply any composition. Why? Because the persons are considered in two ways. They are either considered in relation to the divine essence, with which they are really identical and one and the same thing in reality. Thus, there is no composition on the part of person and essence. Or in relation to each other, in which they are really opposed and thus really distinct. And that means there's no composition, because we have said the composition is the union of really distinct things, not the opposition of real distinct things. Those are two different things. So if you can provide a real distinction, which implies no union, you can have simplicity and real distinction at the same time. And this is why only the predicate of relation in categories of Aristotle is able to produce a real distinction without composition. Any other predicate, except relation, Aristotle 10 categories, will imply a composition if there's a real distinction between that predicate and the subject or the substance, because those predicates, unlike relation, only are in something. They're not towards something, unlike relation. But because of this relation's twofold function, it is able to be really identical insofar as it is in the subject, and real distinct insofar as it refers to its correlative. So it produces no composition whatsoever. But in the case of attributes, as I said, since they're after the mode of predicate of quality, they have to be identical. Otherwise, they will either be real distinct and separate, which is multitude of gods, or real distinct and separate, which is composition. And this is why we say the relations are identical to divine essence, because if they were not, then just like the quality predicate, they would produce composition. So relation must be identical to God's essence in order to avoid composition, but it must be really distinct from its correlative, because that's what relation is, and it produces no composition whatsoever, because it's opposition, it's not union. Father and son, insofar as they're related to each other, they're not united, they are opposed. Neither are they united in reference to the essence. The union which we speak of is an improper sense, because they're really identical. So to put it simply, we should say that the Father and Son, insofar as they are God, they're identical, not united. Because when you say union, that implies two things coming together. So when we say there's unity of essence in God, we do not mean unity in a proper sense, taken insofar as it means union, meaning putting together two things. By unity of the divine essence, we mean real identity. And that's why I try to point out to Dr. Andani in DMs. I don't know if you read it, but yeah, that's the whole, that's the reason why only relation can distinguish without composition. Any other predicate produces composition except relation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when I first grasped relation and like the way in which relation is distinct from the other categories, like everything just clicked to me. Everything just sort of came together, and I finally was like, oh yeah, okay, all of this just makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no way to understand what a relation is and then say, oh, maybe these arguments work. No, if you understand it, then all of these arguments will just look ridiculous.
Okay, so here, Saif Allah, my only problem with Trinitarianism is the view of identity. I don't think it works with Leibniz law. Yeah, read. There's a good. I don't know exactly which chapter this is specifically discussed in. There actually is a good dissertation on Leibniz's view of the Trinity and how Leibniz himself did not think that the scholastic doctrine of the Trinity was at all opposed to his own law. And he gives the same justification for it that St. Thomas and his commentators give, by the way, which is interesting.
Yeah, Leibniz. Sorry. So Leibniz himself, who is quote unquote the author of this view or the owner of this rule, he himself says it doesn't work against the Trinity. So let's just ask from him who came up with this rule. He doesn't think that, and I'm sure he knew more than all of us about his own rule. I mean,
it has to. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, it has to do with terms materially and terms formally taken. I can't remember where I wrote notes about this. I don't remember whether I did a thread or if this was like in Papacy Hub or something. But when you go into like a treatment of logic, it's very important that there are different ways in which a single thing can be regarded, formally speaking. There's different aspects in which the term could be accepted. And basically the issue with like the sophism that comes from an abuse of Leibniz's law is basically that sorry, my wife was giving me my 24-pack of White Monster because my daughter was throwing the White Monster cans across the room. But anyways, the sophism, there's a sophism that comes here, and it's the fact that when you mention Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, you're taking it in a different acceptation than when you mention the term God. And this is like a very, very basic fallacy that gets committed literally all the time. This fallacy gets committed all the time and leads to equivocation in many different uh, arguments. So yeah, studying the way that terms are, the different aspects in which terms are taken and how that can result in logical fallacies is very important for understanding this. And this is one of the ways that the abuse of Leibniz's law leads to sophisms. Yeah, so I think that's all that I had to say about that.
Yeah.
Again, eventually I want to write all this down a little bit more in detail.
I posted the link to Leibniz's book, so it's in private chat. Just post it in the live chat because I don't know how to do it on StreamYard, but it's in the private chat. You can do it now.
Oh, yeah, I can add that.
Yeah.
Okay, let me.
I posted in private chat. Yeah, that's it. So, guys, you can read that, download that book and read it. Leibniz himself says his law does not apply to the Trinity. Or let me put it this way: it applies to the Trinity, but it does not go against the Trinity. Basically, he himself says that this law is valid.
So it wouldn't defy Leibniz's law because the properties of the persons are opposing. Would you say that this is right? Not exactly. The reason that it doesn't is because when you say, for example, basically it has to do with a lot of what Astro just said on the nature of relation. It doesn't really have to do with the nature of opposition and how relation, like when you say the Father is God, Father is talking about the Father insofar as he has a relation to the Son. But then when you apply Leibniz's law, you go from that as being applied under that aspect to that being materially taking, which just means the fact that paternity is really, even while it's virtually distinct, it's really identical to the deity. So yeah, it would be just as fallacious, as I said with the example before, to somehow take the fact that 2 squared equals 4 and the fact that the square root of 16 is 4 and say because of this these are the same exact equation. Like that would obviously be fallacious because the acceptations of them are completely different. Sorry, does that all make sense? Okay, so yeah, let's continue now.
You just can't have that. If you posit distinctions that are even internal to God, then I would apply that trap argument that I give to the Sunnis. I would apply it to the Thomists. I would say, okay, so you have God, and then you have something that's distinct from God. It doesn't matter how you
Yeah, but we don't think that it's distinct from God.
label the distinction. That distinction is either going to depend on God, or God is going to depend on the distinction. You're going to sort of fall off. So
yeah. So how would you deal when it comes to dependency amongst the distinctions?
Yeah. So let me just make it clear one more time. We absolutely reject what he says here. Basically, that his argument as applied to Sunnis applies to us because, as I said, we reject the Sunni view. Sunni view says attributes of God are neither his essence nor other than his essence. In other words, they're neither his essence because they're not identical to it. They're really distinct. But we say relations are identical to the essence. So we completely differ. So already the Sunni view is just out of room because we literally reject the most fundamental axiom of Sunni belief, which is that they are neither God's essence nor other than God's essence. No, relations are God's essence. So unlike Sunnis, we do claim real identity. And the second part, nor other than his essence, well, that part's already false because if they're really identical to his essence, that means they're not other than God himself. So Sunni law is false according to us. So the argument does not apply to us. Rather, Father and Son, insofar as they are God, they're absolutely identical. Insofar as they are Father and the Son, they're relatively opposed. And this relative opposition produces no composition because composition is the union of distinct things, not real distinction per se. Yeah. And dependency. Oh, sorry. Dependency. So there's no proper dependency in God because so dependency can be considered personally in God and essentially. essentially speaking, there's no dependency, in as much as of all three persons, there's numerically one singular divine essence, which is absolutely simple and independent. So since all three of them, essentially speaking, have one and the same essence, there's no dependence. And personally, there's no dependence either, because the Father does not produce the Son by an act of the free will, so that we're able to say, oh, if the Father did not do this, then the Son would not exist. It's not a free act, it's a necessary act, in as much as Father, by understanding, cannot but produce a word, and Father and the Son, by loving, cannot, by willing themselves, cannot but aspire to the Holy Spirit. So both personally and essentially, there's no dependency whatsoever. Just like we say, omnipotence cannot be conceived without considering all possible things. Yet nobody says in their right mind that omnipotence is dependent on exterior things, even though it cannot be conceived without them, right? So when you say God is omnipotent, omnipotence necessarily implies conceiving of all possibilities. So if you don't conceive of all possibilities, if you don't have that, then there's no omnipotence. But nobody says God's omnipotence depends on those possible things. So if it's not like this, why would we say the same to the Trinity?
So true. Okay, so would you say that if the attributes are not identical to God, they are necessarily really distinct? Yes, because of the law of excluded middle. Something is either really identical or really distinct.
Yeah, if they're not really identical, then they're really distinct. It's that simple.
Okay. Okay, great question, Christopher, but we really do have to. How much longer is this video? Another hour?
Christian, let's do something. Let's just, sorry, but ignore the chat and get to the video first, finish it, and then we can get to the chat. I think that's
okay.
better.
Yeah, well, I'll if there's a super chat, I'll answer. But other than that, let's just get to it.
You have the divine essence, and then you have the divine essence. I guess virtually speaking, you have this Father, right? This, they even said this on the stream this morning, that like there's like a virtual emanation from the divine essence, which is the Father. I don't think Thomas actually says that, but that's what they said this morning, and Christian and the team seem to agree with it. So
okay. Okay. Oh my goodness. Okay, yeah, because this actually ties in with what somebody just asked. I think the argument is, does the essence come first or relation between the persons?
Of course.
Yeah, this argument's all the time. There's multiple different views. Melina says that the Father virtually emanates from the intellect. The Thomists say that the Father virtually emanates from the essence. I don't know what the other schools say. What does
let me tell you all of it. So there are 4 positions actually. Okay, sorry, 3. So one position says Father is unbegotten, and he has no root whatsoever, neither real, because there is no real production of the Father. He's simply unbegotten, nor virtual. So he doesn't even virtually emanate from the essence. That's the view of Gonzalez. So he was a Thomist, but nobody takes his position except himself. That's one view, basically. Okay. So, and let me tell you what virtual emanation. So a real emanation is basically a real production, like how the Son is produced or how the Holy Spirit is produced. In other words, there's a real production, which is real distinct from its producer. Virtual emanation, on the other hand, is not a real emanation or real production, but it's a emanation in our way of understanding, insofar as, just like we say essence and attributes in God are really identical, but it's the attributes that emanate from the essence in our mode of understanding, because essence is more fundamental to the more fundamental than attributes. So there's a virtual root to attributes, and that's the essence. So it's not real thing. Attributes are not really rooted in essence. They're really identical to it. It's just in our way of thinking that we think essence is that which is root of the attributes. Likewise, essence is the root of paternity. So Gonzalez says there's no emanation whatsoever, neither real nor virtual. Suarez, which all Thomists agree with, unironic, this is so interesting. The view that Thomists take is Suarez's view, actually. He says paternity virtually emanates from the divine essence immediately, without any mediary. Molina says, and a bunch of other Jesuits, I forgot their names, but they say Father emanates from the essential intellection as it is an operation, just like some emanates from the notional intellection or intellect as it is in the Father. So they say Father emanates from the essential operation of intellection, and then basically owns that operation, and that operation becomes notional, and then sun emanates from it. That's Molina's view. She's entirely rejected. And Suarez finally says the divine essence virtually emanates. Sorry, fatherhood virtually emanates from the divine essence without any intermediary. And how does that happen? Well, divine nature is a fecund nature, right? So it wants to seek and diffuse itself. But it cannot diffuse itself if there is no first person that is unproduced to produce in others. Because if divine essence itself produced it, since producer and producer are really distinguished, then the divine essence would be distinguished from the persons, which is impossible. So there must emanate virtually a person from the divine essence to produce other persons. Now that person is the Father. So Father immediately virtually emanates from the divine essence as a Father. And Father immediately generates the Son. Like as soon as, let's say in our way of thinking, as soon as the Father is virtually emanated, he generates. That's why we say that we can say both, namely, Father generates because he's the Father, and because he generates, he's the Father. Well, Father generates because he's the Father, because Father virtually emanates from the divine essence, and thus is prior to the act of generation. At the same time, we can say Father is the Father because he generates, because relation as relation is after action, but relation as a hypostatic form is before action.
So true.
Yeah, so that's how we solve the apparent contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we Sicilianus.
That
yeah,
last 60 seconds is the very important resolution.
Yeah. So Sicilianus, yeah, Suarez vindicated because old Thomists accept his position on this.
Okay, please cover Dr. Andani's free lunch point at 1 hour. If the two faculties of intellect and will are really one thing in God, the divine essence, so what's the basis for the two processions? We already talked about that.
Yeah, we already talked about
Okay, let's
this.
continue.
Somehow the Father virtually emanates from the divine essence. So now you have the Father, and again, the Father is like sort of intellect and will, even though they're supposed to be the same thing. And then you have the first procession, which is the Word, and then you have the second procession, which is the Holy Spirit. So already here, it seems to me that now, because you're calling these immanent acts, right? Like the procession of the Son is an immanent act. The procession of the Holy Spirit is an immanent act.
Yeah.
So now we do have distinction within the divine essence.
Yeah.
And at this point, I would say it doesn't seem God is simple anymore.
Well, I mean, again, definition of simple, but we already covered that.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you entirely. I think a lot of people, because they are approaching the question of divine simplicity already within the dogmatic structure of Christianity, they don't understand really what exactly is meant by simplicity, and they don't understand how things.
I don't think we're the ones who don't understand Dr. Nimesh. I'm sorry, Dr. Nimesh, but yeah.
You actually made a good point. They don't.
That is a good point. A lot of people do not understand. That's correct. That's correct. But I mean, the Thomists that you are critiquing right now, the school of the Thomists, the Schola Thome, the commentators, they don't really misunderstand this. They understand quite well what it means.
Things that ordinary sort of Catholic Christianity says about God are incompatible with it. If you read, for example, in Plotinus, or if you read in other Eastern sources, when they talk about the simplicity of the ultimate principle, they make it clear that you cannot say anything about it. You cannot attribute distinctions into it. If there are distinctions or different words that we use about it, it's strictly on our side, right? There are different.
Yeah, but those people are wrong, and our theologians critique them. Yeah. Like, have you read, and like literally any of our medievals are going to quote those people and critique them, and say how incoherent their views are. So I'm not sure why you're bringing that up as a point, as like an
why does it matter?
Our guys always literally list them one by one and critique them all.
St. Thomas had read the entirety of Guide for the Perplexed by Maimonides, so it's not like he was unaware of it. He just says it's nonsense. That's what he says. He's not unaware. He just believes it's nonsense.
Yeah, and I mean, if you read the distinction in the sentences that we recommended for you, I mean, he goes over in very strong detail and in a very even a more, he states Maimonides' view in a more systematic, rigorous, and detailed way than Maimonides stated his own view, and then critiques it. And he was like 29 when he was writing this still. So that's just like, that's kind of just irrelevant to bring up.
What's amazing
Neo-Platonists disagree with you. Yeah, and they're wrong.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that Sentence's commentary, that question on Sentence's commentary, that's considered to be one of, if not the most deep explanation of the different views among all scholastics. So St. Thomas was basically putting everything he knew in that article.
Mm-hmm. It's really
Even
great, and that was one of the
summarizing.
first ones he wrote. So he was still in his
Yeah.
20s when he wrote it.
Yeah,
I don't know
remember
how
reading
young
this
he
book.
was. He might have been like 27, 28 when he wrote that,
Maybe.
because he was writing
Yeah.
from when he was 27 to 32. So he was really young.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember reading it, and as I was reading, I was like, why does this not end? Like, it was so long, I couldn't finish it.
I've probably read that like 10, 15 times. That's actually my magister when he was teaching me about divine simplicity. We read through that like in extreme, like excruciating detail. Spent like an entire 2-hour class session just going over one article in distinction 2 of book 1. It was it was kind of crazy. Anyways,
Let's go.
He actually made us read Maimonides too. So I myself have read the Guide to the Perplexed. So yeah, I actually have read Maimonides in plenty of. Okay, the free lunch argument, we already covered it. We already covered it in this video, and we'll eventually get there. We'll eventually get there. We're not going to skip forward. Sorry, friend. I'm not going to skip forward. Since a lot of this seems to be Plotinus is the authority on divine simplicity versus Plotinus is wrong and gay, can you, in brief or in detail, explain specifically the errors of St. Thomas sees in Plotinus? Yeah, we already went over those earlier, but Astro, do you want to recapitulate what we said earlier about Plotinus?
Yeah, basically, to put it simply, so there are two views. One is that all of these names are negations and not positive predicates. So when I say God is knowing, that just means God is not dumb. When I say God is powerful, that means God is not powerless, basically. Or the other one is basically all these attributes are said causally. So when we say God is knowing, we mean that God causes knowledge externally. When we say God is good, he causes knowledge. He causes goodness in us externally. So St. Thomas gives a bunch of arguments. But simple ones are this: basically, nothing can be founded in negation if it's not found in affirmation. So every negation is found in some affirmation. So we cannot basically reduce these names to mere negations. And to the other one, which is like causal names, like God is said to be knowing because he causes knowledge. Well, if that's the case, then we should be equally able to say anything God causes, that God should be attributed to with that name. So if God causes a body, God is a body. Because why? All these attributes are said causally. So if God is knowing because he causes, then God is a body because he causes bodies to exist, which seems ridiculous. So St. Thomas says that neither negation nor causality can make sense of divine attributes. It has to be a positive predicate, which are identical with one another and with the divine essence because of God's simplicity. And if you want to read this, go to De Potentia, question 7, article 4 and 5, Summa Contra Gentiles, book 1, chapter 27 to 33, and then Summa Theologiae, question 13, Prima Pars, question 13, articles 2 to 4, and then sentences, book 1, distinction 2, question 1, article 3. So just read these. St. Thomas as a full refutation of all of those views.
Yeah, and if you're a big dumb Compendium Theologiae, book 1, what is the chapter number, like 30 something?
Yeah, it starts from chapter 17 and ends in chapter. Hold on, I actually don't know. I mean, I can check it right now. A moment.
Yeah. So De Potentia and sentences are very hard text. Summa texts aren't terrible. Summa Contra Gentiles aren't terrible, and Compendium Theologiae is probably going to be the easiest text for going over this.
So chapter
divine
21,
naming stuff is fun.
Chapter 21. Yeah, it's fun. Also, I forgot that one thing. He also talks about in De Veritate, question 2, article 1.
Yeah,
on divine knowledge. He talks about it there, and it's extremely detailed. Yeah.
Okay, so I hope that was sufficient. So let's continue.
Concepts, but the thing itself that we refer to is absolutely simple and without any sort of internal differentiation whatsoever. Now, you cannot say that something that is absolutely simple and without any internal differentiation whatsoever also has these distinct processes going on within it, because then you've differentiated it, and that much is clear.
Okay, that again, simplicity is not the opposite of distinction. Simplicity is the opposite of composition. Okay.
Sometimes people seem confused and they say, well, no, it's not as if the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are parts of God in the way that, like, my car has various parts. But there's a confusion here about what is meant by part. We don't only use the word part to refer to removable pieces of things. Like you can remove, for example, the engine out of a car.
We mean the union of really distinct things. We're very precise about what we mean.
We also use the word part to remove the thing, to refer to the internally differentiated aspects of a thing, which cannot be removed from it, strictly speaking. So, for example, we can.
Yeah, but that's not what we mean by that. That's not at all what the tradition means by that. Which is crazy because this guy wrote a book about what the tradition means by divine simplicity.
Yeah.
Say that.
Like who was he quoting? I want to skim through that book and see who was he quoting. Was he just like giving idiosyncratic readings of St. Thomas or something? I'm very curious who Dr. Namesh was quoting. Imagine he just like quotes Plotinus and he's like, "This is the Catholic tradition."
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that'd be crazy.
Yeah. So
I can't think of any Christian Plotinian thinkers off the top of my head, except some like really weird medievals. But yeah, that's
marriage. Conflict resolution is a part of marriage. That's a perfectly reasonable and sensible way to talk about it, and that's an intelligible sentence. But it's not as if conflict resolution is some piece of something called marriage that you can just remove just like that. It's not like that. Marriage, as an intellectual object, as a phenomenon that we can consider with our minds, is multifaceted. It has different parts, and one of these parts is conflict resolution. Or think, for example, about the denouement.
What? Marriage is composed of conflict resolution as one of its really distinct parts. Is this true, chat? Is this true?
Denouement of a story, right? Every story, sort of by definition, has a denouement if it doesn't just end in its climactic moment. But it's not as if you can remove the denouement from a story. It's not that sort of thing that can just be removed, like you can remove a branch from a tree or anything like that. Rather, the idea.
And this also completely just steps over the fact that there are traditions of simplicity, like the Scotists, who talk about various different formalities. I mean, I would say that they are incompatible with divine simplicity. That's not for me to refute them. That's for them to refute them, since they want to refute scholastic doctrine of the Trinity. Nicholas of Cusa. That would be a good example, although it's disputed whether they actually held to these positions or whether it was simply like a linguistic issue that is reflected in some of the like actually orthodox teachers.
Is that whenever you grasp a whole with the intellect and you can differentiate within that whole different aspects, right, that are different from each other, then you don't have something simple. Marriage as a phenomenon is not a simple thing. It's a complicated thing. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has all these different aspects to it.
Dude.
A story, any story whatsoever, has a beginning and a middle and an end, a denouement, a climax, a preparation for the story, a narrative. These are all different parts of a story. That doesn't mean that a story is a physical thing that you can break up into pieces. So also, if we grasp God as an object for our intellects, and we distinguish in God between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, or these internal processions and all this other stuff, we are clearly undermining his simplicity. We are denying that.
Oh my goodness! Guy... Can I say something? Just throughout the whole video, they just say, "Oh, but it seems like it goes against simplicity." Why? Every time you say that, you just say, "Oh, because it's the case." We literally gave a positive case as to why relation doesn't lead to composition. So why do you keep saying, "Oh, well, it seems that it leads to composition"? Why is it that you think distinction means composition? I just don't understand what kind of reasoning exists behind this. And I watched the whole thing before we actually went on, like you start the stream. They give zero arguments to justify why distinction causes composition. They give zero arguments throughout the whole video. 1 hour, no arguments. I watched, but in detail, I didn't miss any part, and they don't say why. That's just so annoying in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is super annoying because there are like we would say that because this is a matter of like the Trinity being a revealed dogma that is necessary for salvation. Like affirming the Trinity is something truly and properly necessary for salvation. So like the stakes are pretty high. So like if you're going to go out there and critique this, it should be something which is well put together and like each one of your terms should be well defined and such. I didn't see that. I'll trust you on this that it doesn't come later. But I personally I haven't seen anything to where they've done this. So I don't know. I'll trust you, Astro, that they don't do this. But yeah, it is quite frustrating. For a lot of people. I mean, it's these type of arguments are rhetorically powerful because. In a lot of these cases, there isn't for the audience a sort of self-reflection of what they mean by these different terms when they're positing formal contradiction. Okay, let's continue.
that is simple when we do all these things, even though we're not talking about removable material parts or anything like that. A clear example for, when you distinguish between matter and form in an object, right? You can use artificial objects. That one's a little complicated. You can also refer to like natural substances, like a human being or a rabbit or whatever. There's a distinction in those things between matter and form. That doesn't mean that you can remove matter from form, but there is still a distinction. There's still an internal differentiation between that which gives a thing intelligibility and that which particularizes it. So when it comes to the simple God, we cannot have
Form just gives the thing intelligibility. Real. That's the only function of form.
those distinctions.
That is like honestly the weirdest aspect of form to point out when you're talking about matter and form. Like he said that. So for form, because form has three aspects: the principle of operation, that which makes it intelligible, and that which specifies. But that which specifies is always like the primary one. And he also mentioned matter is individuating. So apparently base Thomist moment. But he's like, matter is that which individuates, and then form is that which makes something intelligible. That's like the weirdest way of okay, I know I'm nitpicking here, but that is like the weirdest possible aspect of form that he could have listed. He should have said that which specifies and that which individuates. That would have made a lot more sense.
We cannot have a distinction between that which particularizes and that which gives intelligibility. We cannot have a distinction between that which proceeds and that which proceeds from, that which is proceeded and so on, that which begets and that which is begotten. Because all of these, if we start talking about the divine nature,
Wait. What did he say?
we cannot have a distinction between that which proceeds and that which proceeds from,
Why not?
Yeah.
Why can't we have a distinction? Why?
Quite the
Why not?
contrary.
Why not?
You must have it. How can the same thing produce itself? It's impossible. So there must be a distinction between that which is produced and that which is the producer. They cannot be identical. That which is produced is really distinct from that which is the producer. Nothing can produce its own self. I don't know why it is impossible. Yes, they're identical to the same essence, but when we're talking about production, that production is between themselves, not insofar as they're related to the divine essence, but insofar as they are related to each other. That's where the production is, not the relation to the essence. This is for the 10th time we're saying it. Father and Son are not distinguished insofar as they are related to the essence, but insofar as they are related to each other. Father's correlative is the Son. It's not the divine essence. When you say Father and when you say divine essence, there's no opposition, so they cannot be distinguished. But when you say Father and the Son, they're opposed, so they must be distinguished. I don't know why it's impossible. And again, no arguments. It's just simply saying, well, they cannot be distinguished. They cannot be distinguished.
Yeah. Okay. Let's continue. I rescheduled my meeting, by the way, so we're gonna get through this.
That which is
you sure you're not?
So
okay.
I'm sure I'm what?
I mean, if you want, we can do another stream if you want. If it's a important meeting.
No. It's fine. I can easily reschedule it.
Oh, okay.
Between that which proceeds and that which proceeds from, that which is proceeded and so on, that which begets and that which is begotten. Because all of these, if we start talking about the divine nature as having these things within it, then we've compromised its simplicity. So you have to choose between the simplicity or the processions in God and so on.
Yeah, and this was one of your sort of first arguments.
Okay, so this is the first objection. If the divine essence is absolutely simple, there is nothing to ground the truth of the assertion that multiple distinct relations subsist in it. The statement couldn't possibly be true in the same way that it couldn't possibly be true to say that a rock is in pain or that it enjoys jazz music, because there's nothing there to make the proposition true. At best, what makes the assertion true in a case like this is something in the person making it, as when someone says that ice cream is delicious. But this would imply that the Trinity is in our minds as a way we understand God, not something in God himself. Okay, one, please make syllogisms. I'm begging you. But two, when it comes to this, the first proposition is just wrong. At least the condition of the first is what is being where the equivocation we pointed out when it comes to, or not really equivocation, but misinterpretation of simplicity.
Yeah,
what are
we
these?
spent like
okay, bro,
20 minutes. Yeah, we spent 20 minutes explaining that God is there's a virtual multiplicity in God. So I don't know why he's saying it. The problem is that when these guys talk about simplicity, they are only considering the absolutely undifferentiated aspect in simplicity, not the aspect which is at the same time virtually multiple. Divine simplicity in no way excludes multiplicity. It only excludes composition. So if you can have multiplicity without composition, then it's fine. Believe me, it's fine. We have given arguments why it's fine.
Yeah.
God is virtually multiple. It has nothing to do with composition, because virtual multiplicity is actually entailed in a sense by divine simplicity, as we explained, how God's essence, because of its eminence, contains all these perfections as one. So it is virtually multiple. So I don't know why these guys are ignoring.
Yeah, I don't think they have an adequate sort of notion of like the various different concepts that are at play between like multiplicity, simplicity, unity, composition, like all of these distinct notions. Like they kind of all just throw them together into this one batch, and therefore they get to, if you make distinction, then that's against divine simplicity.
Yeah, and both of them, when they talk about distinction, they just say, "Oh, it's in our minds." Well, no, there's a foundation in God Himself.
Arguments over here that you had provided. So
yeah, if you don't mind, let me just read it here.
Okay, we're not going to let you read it.
Yeah, because we just refuse.
There is a sort of an argument that we can give to show that this cannot possibly be true, but it's not that it entails a contradiction. It's that there is nothing that allows you to make those statements to make them true. So I'll give an example. If the divine essence is absolutely simple.
We're not letting you read this.
So, for example, when I say that ice cream is delicious, it's not that it has on me. That God is absolutely simple. Then we cannot say that there are multiple distinct processions in God, because there simply is no way to make those statements true. There's nothing there that can make those statements true, right? There is just the simple divine essence, and so you cannot use. You can have multiple different relations applicable to it.
No offense, but if you're paying more than $30 per month on car insurance, you're getting ripped.
Is that how you'd imagine an American, Astro?
Yeah, probably.
Is he like the ideal American?
It would be base if he said, "No offense, but I think your argument is bad. I wish Ad was something like this."
Off, guys. So everyone is ditching their
terrible. We get destroyed.
Yeah,
and you gave this sort of example, right? Whatever we predicate of a thing, there must be something about the thing or within the thing that makes the predication true.
Right. So
we talked about the twofold correspondence of the virtual distinction, and then also like the distinction between the persons is a real distinction. So there actually isn't merely the sublime perfection of the object, such as with the virtual distinction, which leads to virtual multiplicity, but also there's also like the real foundation of the processions. So we already said this.
Let's imagine, for example, that this black square here with all these shapes in it, that's an object. Okay, and these shapes represent different qualities or properties or whatever you want to call them that belong to that object. There's some things that we can predicate of that object that would be true. For example, a sort of a light blue triangle, that's true. Why is that? Because there's something that corresponds to the predication in the object. The magenta.
How can we justify that there's a base in God Himself? Because by definition, the deity contains all formal or simply simple perfections in itself in a formal and eminent manner. Because that's just what it means to be God.
Let me just use
the diamond.
Can you stop,
bro? We need to get through. We need to get through. Okay, give it quickly.
Silianus, no. I'll explain to him on Discord because I have Silianus. Just DM me and we'll discuss it. Okay.
Okay. Good. We need to get through this.
Golden star. These symbolize different predications, right? What we say about it corresponds to something that's in it. So that's why those predications can be true. But when there is nothing in the object,
okay, what is the distinction between the two processions? The processions as acts are virtually distinct. Okay.
For predication, then they can't be true. They're false. And so also, if we have a simple essence, right, with no internal differentiation whatsoever, there is nothing distinct in the essence. It's just a pure, simple actuality.
But you can put all of these in the square. You put all of them in the square. And they fit in the square. They're just not adequate to representing the square because of the weakness of the shapes given. This is a perfect analogy for divine simplicity and divine naming. Thank you very much, Dr. Nimesh, for giving us this very good, very, very good analogy for the weakness of our intellect and the sublime perfection of the deity, which formally and eminently contains all of these shapes that we're able to come up with. Thank you very much.
We cannot make multiple really distinct predications of it. We can't say, for example, that there is paternity and filiation and active spiration and passive spiration, because there is nothing in the object that makes those statements true. Now, Christian will try to explain this later on in his video when he says that the procession of intellection produces a representation and so on, and we can talk about that later. But so long as you are talking about absolute simplicity, so long as you're talking about an absolutely simple principle, you cannot say that there isn't that absolutely simple principle, both paternity and filiation, both active spiration and passive spiration, because the simplicity of the object there's nothing in that to correspond to the diversity of predications made of it. So that's why these statements simply cannot be true.
It's virtual.
Now, Thomas, of course, anticipated this sort of objection. This
W.
His reply, right?
Yeah,
to what-
so he says here, whatever proceeds by way of outward procession is necessarily distinct from the source whence it proceeds, whereas whatever proceeds within by an intelligible procession is not necessarily distinct.
So this is between immanent and transient procession.
Indeed, the more perfectly it proceeds, the more closely it is one with the source whence it proceeds. For it is clear that the more a thing is understood, the more closely is the intellectual conception joined and united to the intellectual agent, since the intellect, by the very act of understanding, is made one with the object understood. Thus, as the divine intelligence is the very supreme perfection of God, the divine word of necessity
Yo, the very supreme perfection of God. Interesting.
is of necessity perfectly one with the source whence he proceeds, without any kind of diversity.
And object is entirely the same as the intellect.
Yeah, W.
Now,
Yeah, so when I read this,
Yeah.
it sounds like, the Thomist is trying to, have his cake and eat it too, right? On one hand, they want to affirm that there's a procession, right, and a proceeder, namely
Right.
the Father, right? They want to affirm a distinction between the begetter and the begotten. And yet, like right after, then they want to say, yeah, but they're one.
right, because it's both the divine essence.
Under different aspects. This is not like terribly difficult. We do this all the time.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like they want to have, it seems to me anyway, that this is sort of like violating, the law of identity in a sense. Because if you take those things together, if you say that, okay, the Father, which is the divine intellect.
Yeah, it would only violate the law of identity if the law of identity happened to be that any sort of predication materially taken, if identical to a different one is identical to each other, that would absolutely make no sense. That would make no sense whatsoever. You would, as I mentioned earlier, you would have to say like crazy things like 2 squared is the same exact equation as the like square root of 16. Like that would make absolutely no sense. Like those aren't the same equation unless you want to take these materially, which basically means like what that is in its conclusion identical to. Like it would only if you had a very deficient view of identity that, as we mentioned, like Leibniz himself concedes our view.
Begets the Son, which is the divine word, but then you also say that the divine word is of necessity perfectly one with the source, hence he, from which he proceeds, without diversity. Then will that not just collapse into the divine essence identical to the Father, like just begets itself?
Well, there are two things here,
No.
really. The first part,
No, because the divine essence and paternity are not formally identical. So the conclusion that you make is incorrect.
is about this procession. Okay, and Christian talks about this in his video. He says that our intellect is productive, it's fecund, and when we know things by the intellect, we produce an intellectual conception, which corresponds in various ways to the thing that we know, and this thing can be called a conception, a word, whatever.
Do we want to play that?
Yeah, you can play that part because it was coming up in the video.
Sure, yeah.
And it's relevant to this objection that Thomas is discussing here.
Yeah, let me do that. It's around 15 minutes.
Okay, I don't want to.
Conflict.
Oh, come
isn't
on!
Fair. Hunger isn't fair. Being
Yeah,
forced
Malachi,
to work
absolutely.
at the age of 10, not fair. Being robbed of childhood isn't fair.
Save the
Save the
Children.
Children is working hard to make childhood fair for kids everywhere. And you can help. Your gift today can
in cupness, a little cup
Can you posit a distinction between the
Okay.
ideas.
Strictly speaking, what he's saying is false, because if you do propose a distinction between this production of the intellect and the real object, what is produced by the intellect is not a cup, right? It's like that famous painting, "This is not a pipe," right? Representations are not.
Okay, it's intentional. It's representative. Oh my gosh. A little cup in my intellect. Yeah, Stephen Nimesh. I'm so retarded that I think that your intellect produces like a cup with form and matter in your intellect. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. I said intentional being like 5 times, I think, in that video. Okay. Famous scholastic Stephen Nimesh about to epically debunk me. Okay. Yeah, that's really annoying.
Not the things of which they are representations. A mental representation of a cup is not a cup.
It's intentional being. It's that through which we know the thing, okay?
A mental representation of another person is not that person. It's a representation of that person. Just like a portrait of me or a portrait of my grandfather is not my grandfather. It's a portrait of him. It represents him. And so sometimes, I talk about this a little bit in my Eucharist book, sometimes when we talk about representations, we talk about them as if they are the things which they represent. So we can point at a picture of a person on the wall and say that's George Washington, even though strictly speaking, it's just a canvas with paint on it. It's not actually George Washington. It represents George Washington. So here's where I think there is a confusion and there's a bit of a slippage going on, because what is produced by the intellect in knowing is not the object that is known. It's a representation of the object, which can correspond.
Yes, because it's due to the imperfection of our intellects. This is the entire reason why we say that the Procession of intellection produces a real object. It's because that is a perfect procession, whereas ours only provides an intentional object. This is essential to what I said in the video. Oy vey. Oy vey. Okay, this is really annoying. This is really annoying. Astro, do you have anything to say, or should I just keep going?
No, you can keep going because I mean, all I had to say was what you said just now.
Yeah, this is really annoying because the entire point of us saying that the procession of the divinity is a full communication of deity rather than simply producing a representative object is because due to the imperfection of our intellect, we only produce intentional being. We only produce a little concept in the intellect. Whereas God, due to his supreme perfection, does not only produce the object, but actually communicates real deity. So when he's considering himself, he's going to communicate real deity, not simply an intentional image of himself. Like, this is the entire point of what I said. Like, this is the entire point why I bring this up. So it's really annoying that he's just gonna like finger wag me like this and pretend like I don't know what I'm talking about. Because, you know, strictly speaking, you only produce a representation. Now, this couldn't happen with God. That's the point. That's the point, that this couldn't happen with God.
Because our being is not our intellection, so there's no communication of being happening in us. Whereas in God, his being is his intellection, and his being is his volition. So in both of those cases, there's a communication. But yeah, there's a difference. I mean, I'm not gonna kill you guys on something, but yeah, that's what it's simply. I don't want to.
Yeah, and actually, before the actually, but how does like creation, since he knows creation through himself? This is why the word is not only representative of the deity, but insofar as the deity eminently contains all of the perfections of creation, so also is the word a representation of that knowledge as well. This is the common position. Unless you're Ruiz de Montoya, then you're really weird, and you say that also it per se represents the free knowledge of God.
So cringe.
That's what Ruiz de Montoya says. But this is okay. So this what this is representing, that Astro and I know all of the different positions of all of the different schoolmen on these particular questions, means that we didn't just like come in here and make a video and just be like, oh crap, I never thought about the fact that the intellect only produces intentional being. It actually doesn't produce real being. Oh crap, guess we're back to the drawing board. No, there are like 100-page disputations on this within scholastic manuals where they all fight like between 5 different positions and bring up literally everything from the tradition, from reason, and from scripture in order to discuss this very precisely. Like, the Islamic or whatever tradition that Stephen Namesh is part of, like that
Islamic,
they've never
Islamic.
No, the Nemeshian and the Islamic. I'm saying from Dr. Andani.
The
tradition that he's from and the tradition that Namesh is from, which is just kind of his own tradition. He's just made up his own ideology. Neither of these have interacted with any of those sources.
Yeah, they have no idea what's going on in our theology.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's pretty important. And of course, like that isn't to say like that they were bad researchers or that they didn't do their homework or anything like that, because these things aren't really like available to a wide audience. So you wouldn't expect an academic to run across this. But all that I'm saying by making this point is that, yeah, I've thought about all of this already. And like, there's a lot of works to read about this. It isn't just like an oopsies on my part where I just happen to forget that the intellect produces intentional and not real being in creatures. Like, yeah, there's a reason for that. And that's actually like very much constitutive of the whole argument that's being brought forward and the whole argument that gets brought forward by our scholastics.
And he also made one other mistake. He basically said, well, okay, if this word, how do you get to a person? Like, how's this word a person? Well, I mean, if he had actually like studied scholastic theology, and especially St. Thomas, because this distinction is clearly made in St. Thomas himself. St. Thomas says that there is a twofold word in God: essential word and personal word. Essential word is common to all 3 persons. That's basically divine intellection, essential intellection, which is common to all 3, because all 3 persons understand. But that essential word is not produced like the personal word, which is the Son himself. So there's an essential word in God. That essential word is just the divine essence itself, understanding itself. And thus there is a word common to all 3 persons. But but let's say, what is a word? A word implies 2 things. The thing representing the thing understood, and second, production of a thing from the speaker. Now, the essential word has the first one, which is the representation of the thing understood. So the essential word represents what is understood, but it's not produced in God. Therefore, it's a word improperly speaking. So the essential word is common to all three, and it is improperly predicated of God. Whereas personal word, who's the Son himself, he's properly predicated, and it's only that's why we say that word is a properly speaking personal name, because the word, who is the Son himself, is not only the representation of the thing understood, but also produced from a speaker. That's why he's properly speaking the word. But the essential word, although it represents what is understood, it is not produced, and it is common to all three persons. So that's one of that's another blunder that Nimesh makes here, basically, which is a clear distinction made in St. Thomas throughout his works, from Summa Contra Gentiles to question 34 in Summa, to question 27 in Sentences 1.
And
All
also
of
De
these places
Veritate
make
as well,
these
in
distinctions.
Hebrews
Yeah, De
commentary,
Veritate.
Colossians
Exactly,
commentary.
yeah.
I mean, like, I'm pretty sure there's at least 10 different places where he talks about this.
Yeah. Like, how is it that if you say you've studied these, why can't you make this essential personal word distinction, which is basic? Everybody believes in that essential word, which is not a person. Nobody says it's a person. When we're saying it's a person, we're talking about a word in a different sense. So I honestly doubt that he has studied these issues.
Yeah, that's why I want to check his sources in his book on like the Trinity, the post-Catholic theology, whatever. Because I guarantee he's just quoting a bunch of like contemporary analytic philosophers. He's not actually like extensively reading throughout the corpus of St. Thomas. And a lot of these sections from St. Thomas that they're getting, it's getting as they are quoted in secondary sources.
Yeah, and sometimes like people actually read the primary sources, but they misunderstand what they mean. I get it a lot on papers. So when they read something and they say, "Oh, does this mean this?" And I see that what they have understood is exactly like something contrary to what the text intends. So it's so important to read Saint Thomas through the lens of his commentators.
So true.
So you can't just like say, "Oh, I don't care about that. I'm just going to directly read Thomas with my own presupposed metaphysics, which came into being 100 years ago."
Yeah. That is very, very important as well. Is like, not only is there the massive amounts of primary source material to go through, like there is a just absolutely gigantic amount of secondary source material of the commentators on St. Thomas who are synthesizing his works and drawing forth conclusions from him. I mean, yeah, you could read somebody like, if you wanted to kind of get the TLDR, read somebody like Garrigou-Lagrange commenting on these texts. But like even that is still like a very introductory. It's a school. It's basically a school text. It's a text meant for like seminary students. It's not a master text, which is like, I don't know, one of these like the Samontacenses or John of St. Thomas or Billard, like all of these
not even Billard,
individuals that we talk about.
Summarize them.
Yeah, Billard's kind of in that way. Billard is actually a lot like Garrigou-Lagrange.
Yeah, but he's better than him so far as like, he was just a better Distinguo.
Okay. Yeah. So all of that is extremely important, but let's continue. I'm probably going to. I need to get through this. We're 25 minutes in, so we only have. Wait. There's 2 super chats. It's a bit hard to understand what Nimesh is saying because of all of his unnecessarily long analogies. Can you just steelman his arguments without the analogies? Yeah, sure. I got you. This is to cover the cost of the can of White Monster you may need to get to 1 hour. Yeah, that'll take a while.
On to a greater or lesser degree, depending on how good our knowledge is. Okay, so this
is
a confusion, and there's a bit of a slippage going on, because what is produced by the intellect in knowing is not the object that is known. It's a representation of the object, which can correspond to a greater or lesser degree, depending on how good our knowledge is.
This is actually incorrect. When it comes to what is produced by the agent intellect, so this is like really basic too. This is something that you get in like first year philosophy. That which corresponds to a greater or lesser degree is your phantasm, not your idea. And angels and God don't have phantasms; they have ideas. So yeah, this is really really annoying. Because a phantasm, for example, if Astro and I were both to think of like a dog, Astro might think of a beagle and I might think of like a husky. These are 2 different phantasms, and they may, to a greater or lesser degree, insofar as we have studied dogs, it might correspond to dog, like to a particular dog more or less. Like if you flash an image in front of us and then an hour later asked us, depending on how good our imaginative memory is, we might be able to, a greater or lesser degree, imagine what that thing was. So that is completely different than an idea, which is produced by the agent intellect, which is abstracted from the phantasm. This is the same in everybody, or we wouldn't have commonality of language. So when Astro and I think of the concept of dogness, the concept of dogness is something which is the same in both of us. This is like super basic first operation of the intellect logic stuff. So it's crazy that Nimesh is writing works on classical philosophy when he doesn't even know the basics here. That's a really basic error that he just made. Anything to say on that, Astro, or should we continue?
No, that's good.
Okay, so this is where the problem arises, because the representation is really, it's an accident of our intellect. It's an accident of us, right? It's,
as I said before,
a property, sort of activity.
Property is different than an accident, but continue.
That our mind undergoes, but it does not produce a separate object.
It's not an accident. It's the production not an action, but the production of an action.
It's just our mind undergoing a certain activity. That's what knowledge produces, representing. So here's where I think there's a major problem. And if you would go back to the slide about Thomas, reply to objection 2 or whatever, the one we were just at. Yeah. So he says, the more perfectly an intelligible procession proceeds, the more closely it is one with the source once it proceeds. What does he mean here? Because this is tricky. In one sense, what he's saying is true. The better a representation is, the more there's a sort of correspondence between that representation.
Oh, we would say that representation in itself is the production of intentional being in itself is an imperfection that can only happen in creaturely intellects. So yeah, this is exactly the grounds for us saying that God, when God considers himself, doesn't merely produce an intentional image of God. He actually produces God the Word.
Yeah.
He actually communicates the entirety of the deity and not merely some sort of image. I mean, if you go to Summa Contra Gentiles, book 4, I can't remember which chapter, somewhere in the 20s
chapter
or 30s.
11.
Oh, is it 11? Okay,
yeah,
sorry. 11. Yeah, I'm off with my chapter numbers. But if you go, he goes through each level of procession and talks about how procession occurs in plants, in sense beings, so animals, in human intellects, in angels, and then finally in God. To show as you increase up, because angels, interestingly enough, you guys probably don't know this, angels know through what are called the concreated infused species. So angels have, since they don't have senses and they're not acquiring knowledge that way, they actually have infused in them certain species from God, so that they can know things. They also know things in a way through themselves as well, but in an imperfect manner. But these are still accidental for angels. So even while there isn't this as great of a procession that occurs because they don't have sense knowledge like in us, it's still closer to the source in that way. So yeah, we know all of this stuff. And unless Nimesh reads something like Summa Contra Gentiles, book 4, chapter 11, he's not going to understand what's going on here and why this is a very significant argument for St. Thomas. We've responded to the indexical argument like a million times.
Please.
Yeah, we only believe in one intellect in God. So, yeah.
And the real object which it represents. Okay, so the better I know something, the more my representation of that object corresponds to what I know. But the representation is not that thing. It's a representation of the thing. So it's distinct. It's numerically distinct. And the representation is in me. It's an accident of mine. It's something happening in me, which has an intentional referent. It's a representation of something else, but it's still something in me. So it is not true that, for example, if you admit that, for example, that I have a representation of the cup, and let's say that I know this cup very well, in that case, my representation is very adequate to the cup, but it is not the cup. It is not one with it ontologically. It's one with it by virtue of adequacy, or some other sort of word like this.
But Stephen, won't the Thomists simply say that, look, this disparity between the intellectual representation and the object of its intellection, like the cup or the ball or whatever, that this disparity is only true for humans, right? But for
true.
God, it's different, because a Thomist, like an Avicennan, would say that God's knowledge of things is actually the cause of the things.
Okay, right? But that's not the reason. That's not the reason why. That's kind of irrelevant. The practical knowledge.
Yeah, God is of course cause of everything by his knowledge. His being is his intellect, and everything exists in God as in an intelligible mode. But this is just irrelevant to what we're discussing.
Yeah, really, this is more about the medium in quo, rather than God's, rather than considering the decree itself and its relationship to the practical intellect. So yeah, this isn't the relevant critique to make. It actually has more so to do with the formal reason why we only produce intentional being when we know.
Yeah.
So like the ball on Earth is the effect of God's knowledge of the ball.
Mhm.
So in a sense, for God, like to talk about God grasping something through the divine intellect, that conception that God has is going to even be sort of more real than the objects of intellection.
Well, I mean, that's a mixed perfection. So kind of in a way, but since it's a mixed perfection, no, that would not be the case.
Problem with that response is that it talks about one thing and it calls it knowledge when it isn't that. Okay, so God's causing a ball to exist is his causing it to exist. That is not his knowing a ball.
Why did I decide to build an online university?
Shut up.
Well,
there is a crisis now in higher
Why don't you talk about Israel?
education.
Knowing doesn't occur at all. For example, when I know a ball, I don't cause it to exist. What happens is that my intellect produces a representation of the ball, which is adequate.
So he thinks that knowledge means producing an intentional being a representation of the object. That's crazy. Okay, well, angels don't know then because oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That's crazy. That's crazy. That's his definition of knowledge. Well, I mean, when you define terms however you want, it's very easy to critique all of your opponents, I guess.
Well, of course, here's where another thing is happening, because there's the philosophical language going on, and then there is the dogmatic language, right? Dogmatically, Christian, as a Roman Catholic, is
So
obligated
true.
to say that God knows creatures, because of course that's everywhere in the Bible, okay? And that's a
So
philosophical
true.
point. But you know as well as I do that in the neo-platonic tradition and in other traditions which affirm divine simplicity, they deny knowledge of the ultimate principle.
Yeah, well, I don't really care.
Precisely
Yeah,
because
I
there
know.
cannot be this distinction
I
between the known
don't-
intellect and the representation and so on in the ultimate principle. There can't be this distinction.
Oh
So-
yeah.
Yeah, I don't really care. And St. Thomas resolves this objection. Why
Yeah,
don't
just-
when Namesh is going through these, why doesn't he say, "Hey, okay, so this is because St. Thomas read philosophers who made this critique of the ability for God to know things is the distinction between like object and subject. He read philosophers and critiqued these when he wrote about divine knowledge. So why don't you say, okay, well, this is what they critique. This is St. Thomas's response. This is why I don't like St. Thomas's response. Why? Well, I think it's because he can't refute St. Thomas's response. So that's why he doesn't bring it up.
Yeah, Neoplaton's argument is actually trash. Like, oh, if there's knowledge, then there must be a duality of subject and object. Well, Thomas just say subject and object in God, meaning like his act of knowing and the object understood, which is the divineness, are not even distinguished virtually. So there's no multiplicity whatsoever. They're not even distinct virtually. So we can't even say that they're distinct. There's a virtual multiplicity between the two, because his essence and his act of knowing are entirely the same. So not even a virtual distinction exists between the two. So that argument in no way applies to Thomists. I mean, even if we grant that it applied to some schools, it does not apply to Thomism at all, because we don't even make a virtual distinction between God's intellection and essence. And this because,
true.
Formal constituent of the divinity we hold.
So true.
So yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna play it again. This is getting actually kind of annoying me right now.
Strictly speaking, if you want to maintain the simplicity of the absolute principle, you have to deny that it knows and it causes, which is not the same thing as knowing. And you cannot, use a trick of words and say, well, actually, God's knowledge is perfect because it creates. No, that's just not knowledge. That is not knowledge. There's, what knowledge creates is a representation. That's what it's
prove that.
Created in knowledge, not the real known object.
Prove that, and prove that that's not actually just a imperfection of created intellects. Prove it. Prove not even just created intellects, of human intellects. Prove it. I mean, it's just like you can say things all you want.
And so you cannot just take the word knowledge and apply to what God is doing, and all of a sudden the day is saved, because strictly speaking, that's a misuse of language.
Well, let's keep playing what he says, because he'll go on and explain this. But we can already see you disagree with even this sort of intelligible intellect.
Disagree with it because feelings, and then you
can be used.
And you even misrepresented. What like the scholastics even believe about this, because you don't know the distinction between sense and intellective knowledge. But
yeah, so far they have given zero arguments. They just say, "Oh,
it's
because I say so."
know.
I said because I say so. Because I say so. So we don't care if you say so. Give us an argument.
Okay.
Well, keep on for just the rest of the sentence.
That is not merely a representation of God. It would produce a word that is God. This, according to Christian theology.
Okay, so firstly, I'll just say that just to people in the chat. So when you say that, oh, you guys are everything you're saying is a straw man. I mean,
yeah.
What's
straw man?
That to me?
We've went.
I was
Okay.
commenting, so he replied to me. That was his
Okay.
live chat.
Did you say that it was? Oh, so this is responding to you?
Yeah.
Oh man.
Video itself. We've had Thomas's own words on the screen. Where's the straw man? Now, if you tell, like, the only thing you could say is that we straw
I
man.
mean, putting Thomas's words on the stream or just listening to me is not adequate when you want to critique our tradition, because there are many layers of assumptions that you're making that are just incorrect about how terms are defined, about the nature of different things that I'm talking about, the nature of different things that St. Thomas is talking about, and so on and so forth. Responses that are given, like there's a lot of things that need to be brought up. It's not just adequate to say like, oh, we put it on the screen and we read it and then we interpret it in our own framework. Like that's the whole critique. Is as we've shown so far in this video, there's a lot of things that are being missed that need to be brought into the conversation in order to explain why we say the things we do and why the arguments you're giving are not sufficient to refute what we're saying.
And divine simplicity, but we don't do that. Like, I myself believe in divine simplicity. Dr. Nemes has been an ardent defender of divine simplicity in the past. Like, he knows what the doctrine is. So look, it's very easy.
I don't think Dr. Nemes knows what the doctrine of divine simplicity is.
and
He is
that's-
not at all. He's not at all shown that throughout this video.
And that we don't think that the divine simplicity Dr. Andani holds to is actually consistent. We think that it actually destroys God's perfection. Yeah.
Okay, so is an angel's intellect perfect insofar as when it thinks of an essence, it fully grasps the essence? If so, they produce. Can they produce real relation by intellection? So yeah, when it comes to an angel does not have any sort of the limitations that we have. They don't have discursion. They don't do discursive reasoning. They don't define and divide in the way in which we do in order to understand things. So angels work in a completely different way than we do. And then the next question, if so, can they produce real relation by intellect? No, because the knowledge, the species, and this is why they're concreted species, this is still accidental. So only intentional being is present. Whereas with God, this isn't accidental knowledge, and therefore it can produce a real terminus.
Yeah, and the reason it's not accidental is because in God, to be and to know are the same, unlike angels, which are really distinct.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's continue.
To call something a straw man, but again, like, we're giving our views. You don't have to agree with our views. You could just shut off YouTube then. Like, you can go somewhere else, right? Now on this, I'll just say that to me, what was just said is just like internally inconsistent. So on one hand, we have to believe that the divine intellect, which is God, qua Father, genuinely.
Wait. The divine intellect is God, qua Father?
No, I don't know. Yeah, this is essentially misunderstanding. I know what you mean. So this basically the misunderstanding all Muslims had when they interacted with psychological analogy. Yeah. So when we said that, there's divine intellect which produces the word and divine will which produces the spirit. I mean, this part was absent from them, so they thought it was the divine life, not the divine will. But anyways, that's another misunderstanding. So they basically think that the Father is the intellect, the attribute of the intellect. And sometimes, they think that the Son is the attribute of the word, which is the essential word. They think the Son is that essential word. I mean, they didn't even know what it was, but what they say corresponds to what we think by essential intellect. And then they think that Holy Spirit is the attribute of life in God, the attribute of life. That's how Muslims understood it, and that's the misunderstanding right now. No, it is not. Attributes are common to all three persons. Persons are not common to each other. Persons are really distinct. Persons are multiplied. Attributes are not multiplied. So they're not the same. Divine intellection is an attribute which is common to all three. Divine intellection is not the Father. If it was the Father and not the others, then the divine intellection wouldn't be common to all three. So I don't know where this is coming from. It just sounds disappointing in a sense.
Dinosaurs aren't real. Big Bone is out to get you. Okay, we're gonna continue, but I'm gonna put a poll in about whether dinosaurs are real.
Produces a production. Those are the words he used, right?
Right.
Like, there's a real production going on here, a product. So the Father is the producer and the Son is the product. Now, I can accept that, like, just the idea that God the Father produces a product. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with the product being eternal. But then that product is really distinct from the producer. And if God is simple, then that product must be an eternal creation. And frankly, some of what was said here, somebody like Ibn Sina would accept this, and Ibn Sina would say, yeah, you're talking about the
but this comes from another misunderstanding. Is they confuse procession for creation as well, which is why we say that, for example, the spirit doesn't proceed from the free will, but from the necessary will. So yeah, it's God's knowledge of Himself. So this is going to be really what they're doing in a weird way is actually imputing some sort of lack of perfection into the divine intellect, to say that when God is knowing Himself, that just like a creaturely intellect, He's only going to produce a representation of Himself rather than actually communicating the entirety of the deity. So really like in a very roundabout way, no, actually, you're the one which is imputing imperfection in this way, and not us. Although obviously we know that if God wanted to create something like this, of course He could create something like this. But this is then a completely different act than what we're talking about, because then it's virtually imminent and formally imminent, virtually transient. Sorry, I knew I got that.
What he's saying, what he's saying is the emanation of the first intellect, which Neoplatonists believe in, which is that there is this first intellect which emanates necessarily from divine essence, but it's essentially diverse, so they don't have the same nature. But the word we're speaking of is produced by an internal action, not an external action like they posit, which produced the first intellect, but an internal action which distinguishes them from the producer, but it does not distinguish him from that by which the producer produces, which is the divine essence. So both the product and the producer are identified with one and the same being. Therefore, the product is truly God. It's not the first intellect of Avicenna, which is essentially diverse and produced by an external action. I mean, Christian spent 10 minutes of his own video explaining the difference between transient and immanent action. So it should be quite easy.
Yeah, sad, but let's continue.
Of the eternal first intellect, right? But then what Christian and the Thomists say is that somehow this product is God. Like, the product is identical to the producer. And to me, like, you just can't have it that way unless we want to say that God produced a copy of Himself.
Right.
Yeah, but this would just be imputing the imperfection of created intellects to the divine intellect.
And which would then violate not only divine simplicity, but a whole bunch of other things. So that's sort of my reaction to it.
And again, just assertions. It violates simplicity. Why? Give us an argument.
Exactly. This is why the video title was Irrefutable, the Holy Trinity.
Yeah.
It's irrefutable, my friend. Try to refute it. It's irrefutable. The Holy Trinity is not refutable.
The distinction between creator and creature is a red herring. It's entirely irrelevant.
Wait, what?
And which would then violate not only divine simplicity, but a whole bunch of other things. So that's sort of my reaction to it.
My problem is that this appeal to the distinction between creator and creature is a red herring. It's entirely irrelevant. The principal issue at hand.
Okay, no, it actually isn't. To distinguish between the way in which something is said to subsist as predicated of God and as predicated of creatures is not irrelevant. That's an absolutely ridiculous claim. Unless you want to somehow have like all of our concepts have an absolute univocity amongst themselves. So yes, we do negate the imperfections of the way in which things exist in a creaturely mode. Why wouldn't we? Like, what is the other option that you have? Yeah. Like, do you think that everything we predicate of God exists with all of the imperfections of its creaturely mode? Is that what you think? No. Of course we. It's not a red herring at all. Of course, this is from the most fundamental principles of actually believing in God and saying things about God. Like, everybody does this.
I mean, he doesn't believe in divine simplicity anymore, so I guess like
Namesh does believe in divine simplicity.
I think doesn't he reject it because he used to defend it? He doesn't.
So he basically I think this was the thing. So he believed in divine simplicity, and then he got his butt kicked in a debate, and then he denied divine simplicity because he didn't think that it was coherent with the Trinity of the Incarnation. And then finally he was like, well, I think divine simplicity is actually real, which means that the Trinity and Incarnation must be false. And then he denied the Trinity and the Incarnation.
Oh, I thought he said the opposite. He said that these are pagan concepts, so I'm going to reject simplicity. That's what I.
Well, at one point, I mean, he changes his religious beliefs every 3 minutes. I mean, so he probably did say that at one point. Yeah. So that's Dr. Namesh.
Yeah.
We're not going to
That's
be
crazy.
mean to Dr. Andani because I like Dr. Andani. He's a pretty cool guy.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's continue.
Is that Christian seems to recognize that the activity of the intellect is to produce a representation.
No. Oh my gosh. Ah. How do they misunderstand this?
My head actually started hurting.
My 15-year-olds on Discord who watched this got my point here. Why can't Dr. Namesh get this point? The reason that I spoke about intellection in this way was to illustrate the imperfection of our intellects. Oh my gosh. Stream lagging? Yeah, I don't care.
It's actually not lagging. It's it's probably your problem, not Christian's.
Yeah, it's your problem, not my problem. Cry about it.
Yeah.
Intellects are feeble and limited, so our representations are never perfectly adequate to their objects.
No. Not that they're not perfectly adequate. The fact that they are representations. How did you not get this? What kind of Aristotelian doesn't know about the distinction between a phantasm and a concept? Oy vey. And if you've read anything basic by St. Thomas, you'll know that he gives this argument. This is like argument you read on screen. This is literally the argument you read on screen. How do you not get this? Oy vey. Who is better, Astro or Hassan? Can we get a poll? I'll give a poll. Okay, do you have anything else to say, Astro, or should I continue?
No, it's good.
But if God has intellect, his intellect also does not produce a real object, but another representation. And the perfection of God would not imply the reality of an object produced by his intellect, but the perfection of the representation that he has of himself.
No!
So, strictly speaking,
representation is part of the imperfection.
If God has intellect, he would be perfectly self-knowing. That does not imply...
And he would communicate his deity.
...that his self-knowledge is another distinct person, or that his knowledge is anything other than a representation. That's all knowledge is, right?
If we know that it's transcendental in intellect, that they're fecund, that they have fecundity, then we know that there's this communication. Like how is this at all confusing? How is this all confusing? We know that's not merely representative in God because representation implies this imperfection. I don't get how much clearer I could have been in the video. Or how much clearer St. Thomas could be. He talks about this in many different places. They read on screen one of the places where he talks about this.
If you accept this view that knowledge is basically the production of representations by the intellect by
that's not what it is.
Of knowing objects, which the representations refer to.
That's not what it is.
God's perfect knowledge, or God's knowledge, insofar as he's the creator,
that's not what it is.
Would still be a representation. It would not be.
That's not what any of the traditions. That's not what it is. That's literally not what it is. That's not what anybody said. I specifically said that this had to do with the imperfection of creatures.
The being itself.
Guys, clip this.
Right. This is where
I'm dying. I'm dying. Okay, I promise I'll let this. Continue.
Everything starts to fall apart because if you think that knowledge works by means of representations, it is never the goal of the intellect to produce a real object. That's not what knowledge is. Knowledge is not producing real objects. Knowledge is producing adequate representations of objects. And so, if God has knowledge, then his knowledge also does not produce an object. It does not produce what it knows. It simply produces a perfect representation of what it knows. And so, God would perfectly know himself, but his knowledge would still be by means of a representation, and that representation would be distinct from the divine essence itself. It would be a representation of the divine essence, just like, for example, my representation of a cup is distinct from the cup. So I think here there is just a confusion.
Yeah, you just imputed imperfection to God.
Also, once again, essential personal word confusion, by the way.
Yeah, also that.
Yeah.
Oy vey. Okay, so yeah, you can't be more clear. Yeah, just watch. If you're confused by this, just watch the original video. It should be very clear. With what I said, that should be very, very clear.
There's this like.
I know a category error of some kind. So he's starting with a representation model of intellection, and then he's jumping from representation to a divine person. Like the representation somehow magically becomes a divine person.
It's not that it somehow magically becomes it. It's the fact that there's no distinction between God's essence and intellect because of divine simplicity, and therefore because of this and because of the supreme perfection of God, it doesn't have the sort of needy imperfection of merely producing an accidental representation, because again, as I said, God doesn't have accidents due to simplicity. So you guys should all know this because you guys believe in divine simplicity.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Nobody says it magically becomes a person. We explain how it's the case. I just don't know why they're pretending as if like we haven't explained like all of these objections thousands of years ago. I mean, even Saint Augustine discussed all of these objections. Not just
this is stuff we were talking with like the Arians about in like the 4th century. This isn't even like esoteric Baroque scholastic stuff like some of the other things.
Yeah, if the word is subsistent, if it's an incommunicable, if it has an incommunicable property because it's actually produced from a producer, that means it must be established in its own being by an incommunicable property. Now, anything that is subsistent has an incommunicable property. In an intellectual nature, is a what? It's a person. So we don't magically get a person. We explain how we get a person.
Oh. Yeah, and I should have made this video like 3 times longer, going into more detail about every single one of these things, because I could have, but this was meant to be a general introduction. I'm assuming that people
like knew what they were gonna say.
Yeah, it would be nice to have like, you know, I assumed that if I was going to get critiqued, that it would be from like people who are kind of connecting the dots from like a simpler explanation that I gave here. Because believe it or not, this is like the easiest explanation I could have possibly given in that video, even though the video was generally very complicated, just because it's a complicated topic. But yeah, this is quite frustrating. It's quite frustrating. I guess you mistitled your video. Irrefutable is certainly refutable for you to find everything. Yeah, I guess so.
Right. Yeah, so I think that's what's going on. The definition of knowledge is changing as we go from human beings to God.
Isn't.
For us, knowledge is representational. For God, all of a sudden, knowledge would mean producing something. That doesn't follow, right? Why would that be?
We explained it.
This is a point that has to be addressed and explained, and it's not at all obvious. Certainly not to me. It seems to me that if God is perfect,
if you read all of the texts from St. Thomas talking about this before you decide to write a freaking book critiquing it, then yeah, it would be obvious to you, actually. Yeah, it would obviously. Yeah, this is actually the preface for the this is the preface. This is a preface for that, actually. Okay, let's continue.
Then that would just mean that his representations are perfect. But that would not mean that his knowledge is productive of what it knows. No knowledge is productive of what it knows. Knowledge is purely representational. It's a matter of the intellect representing to itself perfectly something else outside of him.
Well, in this case, of course, the object of God's knowledge or the object of God's intellection is God.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the world. It's God. So God...
Well, actually, okay, this isn't true either. And this is something that our scholastics talk about as well, is that when it comes to the word, due to the fact that the medium in which God knows all things is himself, this also has a representative relation when it comes to the knowledge of created things. So it isn't even true to say that this has nothing created at all in relation to this at all. This isn't correct.
It knows himself, and somehow the act of God's self-knowledge produces this product / image / Son of God. Right? That's what they're saying. So the word or the intellectual concept that God conceives as he knows himself, that is the Son of God. Now again, I could accept that, but then for me, that intellectual image of God is not God.
Correct.
Okay, so since he's Dr. Andani, how would this be anything except God? Because so you're conceding that it is. So this isn't me demonstrating strictly this by nature, because somebody could say it's not immediately evident that all knowledge is somehow productive, that this is transcendental, and this is why we can't strictly demonstrate the existence of the Trinity from nature. But since you are conceding this, I can ask you, because of divine simplicity, because of the lack of real distinction between the divine intellection and the divine essence, how is the product not God? How? It seems like you're imputing the imperfections of created intellection, and you're bringing that up into God. So how would this be the case? How would this be the case? Do you have anything to add on that, Astro, or should I continue?
Oh, no, that's fine. That was what I was going to say, but you already said it, so yeah, it's fine.
Correct. Image of God. I have no problem with that in a sense, but then to me that would just be the first creation, right? There'd be no grounds to call the intellectual image of God God. Like, I just cannot see how that can be the case, especially because the intellectual image of God is dependent on God. It's dependent actually in two different ways. It's dependent because it's an act of God, so the act is dependent on the agent, but it's also dependent on God because it is an image of God, right? So in this model, what they call the Son of God as far as I can see, the Son of God is dependent upon God, dependent on the divine essence in at least two different manners of dependence, which just underscores that like there seems to be little grounds metaphysically that I can see to say, turn around and say, okay, the intellectual image of God is the divine essence.
Okay, so Dr. Andani, oh my gosh, another ad. So Dr. Andani,
Okay.
he gave an argument from dependence. You want to treat that, Astro, and how
I
the
mean, we actually
processions
like responded to it like an hour ago. I responded to dependency, but I'll respond to it one more time. Maybe people joined later. So dependency in God can be
personal.
It's fine. Dependency in God can be considered from a essential point of view and from a personal point of view. So essentially speaking, the Father and Son are not dependent because insofar as of two persons, or like the whole Trinity, there is only one divine essence, which is numerically singular and is absolutely independent in every way. So because all three of them have the same essence, nature or substance, they're independent because that nature or essence or substance is independent. Now, personally, there is no dependence of the Son and the Father either, properly speaking, because the Father does not produce the Son or the Spirit by an act of free will, just like he produced creation. So when we speak of creation has actually a real dependence on God, because God actually could have decided not to create. That's called volition. So divine essence could have willed not to create, right? So there's a dependence. Divine will does not. Creation depends on the divine will, but the Son is produced by necessity. So it's a result of necessary action of the Father understanding himself. So the Father cannot but produce the Word, and the Father and the Son cannot but aspire at the Holy Spirit, because they mutually love, necessarily and naturally love each other. So there's no dependence in a personal sense either. There's only one sense of dependence, and it's an improper dependence, insofar as you cannot conceive of relation without its correlative. That's the only kind of distinction we can speak of, but that's not real dependence. That's just the fact that a relation necessarily has a correlative, so you cannot conceive of one without the other. So if you say father, you cannot say, oh yeah, there can be a father without a son, because those are correlatives. So there is a dependence in that sense, but that's not a proper dependence which they have in mind. And also, he made a mistake. And that's one of the mistakes of Neoplatonists. He said, and God's action will be a creature because, action depends on the agent. That's false, because he believes in Neoplatonic conception, which cannot attribute anything to God, even an action. So they believe that God's action is not his essence. Action itself is a creature. We believe that God's action is his very essence. So that's one of the differences we have in our doctrine of simplicity. For us, God's act of creation, even God's act of creation, all of God's actions. I mean, God has one action, but we virtually distinguish them. But God's action is his very essence. The action of God is not a distinct thing from his essence. Otherwise, we would just say that God is actuated by something else. Because action is the ultimate complement of a power. And if God's action is distinct from his power, he's actuated by something other than himself, which would mean that God stands for that thing as potency to act, and thus he's perfected by something else, which is impossible.
Yep. So true. So true, as they say. Okay.
Loans may qualify for help
Let's
from
figure
national
out
debt
about,
relief.
national
Minimum
debt
payments could
relief.
literally.
Right.
Okay, should we keep playing, or should we go to a different part?
Maybe we can skip a little bit further, because I pretty much said what I wanted to say here. Basically, the function of the intellect is to produce my point.
Another, I don't know if you said this one already. I guess this is about how the relations.
Okay, so now it's going to be the argument. Relations cannot be distinct yet identical to the essence. So yeah, this is going to come from the misunderstandings that we talked about earlier, with the way in which the principle that two things are identical to each other if they're identical to a third. So he says the relations cannot be really distinct from one another, yet identical to the divine essence. Thomas's argument fails. Action and passion are really distinct. Not only logically so, neither is... Okay, so it doesn't really matter when it comes to this specific example of action and passion. Just use the principle itself, which has to do with the nature of relation and the distinction between SAN and SAAD. But let's continue. Neither is simply identified with motion as such. Rather, each is a species of motion. Thus, the relations cannot be identical to the divine essence without being identical to each other. Yeah, this doesn't even necessarily follow the fact that even if you wanted to argue, like in argumentum, if I conceded that the example was bad, you still have to actually deal with the fundamental justification which has to do about with the way in which identity functions, and the way in which that is a valid or not a valid principle, and then also the manner in which identity functions in relation to relation, in relation to relation, because there's not the modification of the subject, but rather the order to the terminus, and then also the distinction between essay and an essay ad, and the non contradictory nature of having real distinction, but yet the relations sharing the same essay in, which is not at all being dealt with. So this is a very disappointing objection, because this actually reaches the least possible rung of the ladder when it comes to disputing with St. Thomas, which is just to dispute with his example and not actually dispute with any of the fundamental principles at hand, or to demonstrate at all what your position on this matter is. But Astro, is there anything to say before we listen through this section?
No, all I want to add is that even here he's misreading St. Thomas, thinking that he only teaches a logical distinction between action and passion. For St. Thomas and Thomas, action and passion are distinguished modally, both from motion and from themselves. So even he's even misreading this example and thinking that St. Thomas meant only a logical distinction. No, he did not. Just read question 45, which is in the same Summa, and he says action and passion agree in this. Did you just cross yourself because he said may Allah? That was
Yeah,
based.
of course.
Yeah, that was based. That was based because he said may Allah reward you. Yeah, but
Inshallah.
I mean, for Thomas, they're distinguished modally both from each other and from the motion. So, I mean, once again, misreading of St. Thomas, just like he's been doing it the whole time. So far, they have made zero accurate representation of Thomism, like zero accurate thing, like comments that actually represents what we believe.
I promise this isn't the meme where it's like you misunderstood Thomism. This isn't the meme, I promise. Like there's actual,
it's actually real.
Yep. Okay. So let's actually get into their commentary, and I will attempt not to pause every 5 seconds listening through this. I will attempt it.
Relations. So Christian said this, right? He said the relations in terms of essay in are identical to the divine essence, but the relations with respect to their essay
they are
they add are distinct.
Right.
And of course, the relations refer to these actual processions, or
the processions are the foundation of the relation. They don't refer to the processions themselves. This is why, for example, actually, I won't even get into that, but this is why I said the processions are virtually distinguished from one another, because the processions are merely. Exactly. And this is also why the Thomists say that unless there's relative opposition. So everything is wrong with this.
Basically everything.
Yeah. Okay.
Because for us, generation and aspiration are only virtually distinct. They're not really distinct.
Yeah. Exactly. So
come about because of these two processions that we've already talked about. So you had an argument here, so you can just sort of articulate this.
Sure. So another argument that I stated was that relations cannot be really distinct from one another, and in God is really the same as the divine, right? This is one of 3. But I think that his response fails. So I think if you go to the next slide, you should be able to see this objection. So here's the objection. It would seem that the divine relations are not really distinguished from each other, for things which are identified with the same are identified with each other, right? This is one of Euclid's rules. If two things are identical with a third thing, they're identical to each other. But every relation in God is really the same as the divine essence. So all the relations, strictly speaking, are really the same as the divine essence. Therefore, they're really the same as each other. They're not distinct from each other. And this is his response. He says this: according to the philosopher, namely Aristotle, this argument holds that whatever things are identified with the same thing are identified with each other if the identity be real and logical, as for instance a tunic and a garment, but not if they differ logically. Hence, in the same place, he says that although action is the same as motion, and likewise passion, still it does not follow that action and passion are the same, because action implies reference as of something from which there is motion and the thing moved, whereas passion implies reference as of something which is from another. Likewise, although paternity, justice, filiation is really the same as the divine essence, nevertheless, these two, in their own proper idea and definitions, import opposite respects. Hence, they are distinguished from each other. So here, I think there is a confusion about the nature of identity. He says, for example, that
there is some confusion about the nature of identity here, but it's not with St. Thomas. There is some confusion, but let's let him cook for a second, okay?
Action is motion and passion is motion, but obviously action is not passion, and this is because there is a logical difference, right? Action means one thing. There's a certain meaning to the word action that is not there in the meaning of the word passion, and so on. But strictly speaking, this is confused because even there is also a real difference.
He completely missed it because this is about opposition. This isn't about whether it's logical or not. That's what's like his conclusion is. I don't know how he didn't understand this.
Between action and passion. For example, if I press down on a bed and form an impression on the surface of the bed, there's something different between my pressing and the bed's being bent downwards by my pressing on it. Okay, so the distinction between action and passion corresponds to a real difference between my action and what the bed is undergoing. So there's a real difference in the state of affairs that corresponds to this difference between action and passion. Now, there's one greater event, which includes my pushing into the bed and the bed's being bent or being pressed down. So that's all one event. But this one event is complex. It's not a simple event. It's a complex event. It has two elements: the active element, my pushing; the passive element, the bread's being pushed. So if you go back then to the first 2 slides ago.
Please don't skip the video. I would
Sorry,
like to
bro,
share
I'm
a
skipping
beautiful
it.
story from Gaza today.
Sorry.
My
Can't
name
do it,
is
bro.
Shahd, and in the midst of the war, I tried to save my family by raising funds online. Now,
there's another way that we can save your family, but I don't want to talk about it on it. I can't talk about it. I'm sorry. I can't talk about it. I can't talk about how to save your family. I'm sorry. This is YouTube. I can't talk about it. If I was just on Twitter, I could talk about it, but I'm on YouTube, so I can't talk about how to help your family. I'm sorry. I very much am one heart with you. One, also, where's your hijab? This is very weird that you're dressing in Western clothes just for the ad. This is really weird. Why is she dressing in Western clothes just for the ad? I'm assuming women in Gaza aren't
actually,
without hijab wearing
in Gaza. So so they're like some Muslims are like lukewarm Muslims, so they don't basically wear hijab, and some of them are actually Christians. There are many Muslims in Lebanon and Gaza that don't even wear hijab. Yeah, basically.
Yeah, we know what they say about the Lebanese women. Okay, this is niche inner Arab racism that I've learned by hanging around Arabs. So don't worry about it, listeners. Unless you're Muslim, then I hope that made you laugh. Me saying that. Okay.
Action and passion are really distinct, and not only logically so. It's not just that there's a distinction between the words action and passion. As if there's
why is he so hung up on the example itself?
There's a real distinction between the acting agent and the passive patient, the thing being acted on. And strictly speaking, although action and passion are motion, they are not simply motion per se. They are species of motion. Action is one kind of motion. Passion is another kind of motion. So there is a real distinction between kinds of motion, and action is one of them, and passion is the other. So Thomas's argument does not really survive here, all right? Because if there is a real difference between paternity and filiation, that must
that's St. Thomas to you.
Correspond to a real distinction in God between father and son. There must be real distinctions in God, but of course that is incompatible with saying that filiation and paternity, for example, are really identical to the divine essence. They cannot be, all right? If they are really identical to the divine essence, then they are really identical to each other, even though they mean different things, which of course would be impossible. So
the argument is more about opposition. I mean, I thought that was clear when you read the reply.
Yeah.
But you cannot say that action and passion are identical, but that's because really there is a difference between the acting and the being acted on. So same thing here. The reason why you can't say that paternity and filiation are the same thing is because there really is a difference between the thing that fathers and the thing that is fathered. They are not the same thing. They're not identical to the same thing.
And then once that follows, this would, if you still affirm the paternity and filiation, it would basically divide the divine essence, right? One part of it will have to be acting, and the other part of it would be the receptacle.
That's why we say quasi-passive spiration, and we also use the term principle, because due to the pure actuality of God and His simplicity, and also the necessity. This is why we can talk about like emanation. Like that would be a better word to use. This is why some use the words like emanation, because we're again importing the imperfections of creaturely processions. We're importing these to God and thinking in terms of actuality and potency, which just isn't correct.
That action, right? Because they're just going to say the divine essence is acting on itself. Okay, if the divine essence is acting on itself, then the part that's acting, right, cannot be identical to the part that's receiving,
being acted on,
that's acted on.
Astro, divine essence is acting on itself. Is this real? You're muted. Hello? Astro.
I was muted the whole time. Oh my goodness, I was talking the whole time.
Okay. You were. Okay, go cook. I need to go to the bathroom real quick, so you can cook.
Okay, so the reason this false is because first he's attributing generation, right, the act of generation to the divine essence, which is wrong because acts belong to suppository persons. in the case of God, not to the natures. Rather, nature is the principle by which the suppositum acts. So I'll give you an example. By the way, can you guys hear me? Just say yes so that I can go on. Can you guys be quick? Hello? Anyways, I'm gonna... Okay. So acts belong to supposita, not to the natures. Rather, natures are the principle by which the supposita act. So I'll give you an example which will make it really clear. There's Socrates, okay? Socrates is a principle which acts to beget a son. Socrates' nature is the principle by which Socrates acts, okay? So we do not say, nobody says, human nature generated my son. We say Socrates generated, because Socrates is the principle which generates. But the human nature is the principle by which Socrates generates, okay? So the generative power is rooted in Socrates' nature, not in person. Person is merely the thing that acts, but the nature is that by which he acts. Likewise, Dr. Andani is wrong to say that, well, it's the divine essence producing and produced. No, it's wrong. We cannot say divine essence is produced and unproduced, because divine essence is neither begetting nor begotten. Why? Because, as we said, acts belong to supposita. Thus, we say the divine Father, as virtually distinct from the divine essence, generates the Son, who is also virtually distinct from the divine essence. This follows from the rule of acts belong to supposita, not to natures. So we say that generation is an action of the divine nature, but only insofar as it's in the Father. So it's not the divine essence which is the principle that generates. It's the Father who's the principle that generates, but the divine nature or essence is the principle by which Father generates. And because that's the case, only the producer is termed begetter, not the divine essence. And because the Son is the term produced, only him is the one who is termed begotten, because acts belong to supposita. So divine essence is that by which Father begets. It's not that which begets. That's confusing, attributing actions to supposita. So this is a very clear distinction that needs to be made. Now, in humans, there's a real distinction between a person and nature. So Socrates is really distinct from his nature, and he acts by virtue of his nature and thus produces a son. But in God, Father and the divine essence are only virtually distinct. So, but again, still, because acts belong to supposita, we cannot say divine essence generates, because the moment you say generation, you're talking about a personal act which requires a person, which is the Father. So you can only say the Father generates and the Son is generated, but the divine essence is neither begetting nor begotten, because divine essence is not the principle which generates, but the principle by which the generator generates. You're muted, Christian. You are muted.
I said that's real. The Orthodox get mad when we say this.
Oh, yeah.
Because this also proves the Filioque. So
Yeah.
This proves the Filioque. This shows that we've been right all along.
Yeah.
This is why we got to get them into the trap. This is why I trapped all the Orthodox, because you'd have your average Orthodox like, oh, defense of Trinity against Muslims. Let me watch this. Oh, it's a Catholic. We basically agree on everything, and then I'm leading them through the reasoning process, and then I just randomly drop it on them. And this is why this necessarily implies the Filioque, and they're just like, just like explode. Their head just explodes and goes into a million pieces.
Yeah, the only way. I mean,
go ahead.
J. Dyer is actually consistent to say that power is personal in God, not essential, because that's the only way to avoid the Filioque. So if you're Orthodox and if you believe power is essential, then it's over, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's also tritheistic though. But anyways,
yeah, it's tritheism.
Can you somehow get Trent Horn to dialogue with you? He's still going on about Catholic fundamentalism on the New Pints of the Aquinas episode. I think you guys having a dialogue would do well. I mean, I'm open to it. I just don't think that's something that Trent Horn is interested in. So yeah, I mean, if you guys want to like tag him on Twitter, or if you guys know him, have a contact with him, talk to him. I mean, I'm open to it. I've said it before. I'm open to it, and I think that my interactions with him have been pleasant. So I don't see why not. But yeah, that's up. The ball is in his court, I guess. Put it like that. Okay, let's continue. We only have 24 more minutes left.
It's
Okay.
actually like 10 minutes because the rest is just like reiterating the same things they have said. So just 10 minutes. 10 more.
Okay, if it's not anything new, I won't pause it unless it's
Yeah.
like atrocious.
So that will also like once you affirm both action and passion to the divine essence, right? Paternity and filiation, and of course they are opposed.
Okay, it's not. We don't affirm
Ah.
passion of the
Yeah,
divine
yeah.
essence.
It's only from a grammatical point of view we say that like sun is
because
being generated. It's not in reality.
that's the distinction between the thing and then the manner of expression. Which again, St. Thomas talks about this all the time. And see, I know. I said, okay, let's not pause unless it's something bad. Like 4 seconds later, okay, let's correct this. Okay, yeah, it's literally due to the poverty of our language. Is this how we express things? There's no. This is why a lot of theologians will not speak of passive generation, passive spiration, but quasi-passive spiration.
Yeah, quasi.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to run into the problem of splitting the divine essence. And of course, if you don't split the divine essence, right, then you're going to run into sort of your third argument over here.
Yeah, here's my third argument. If the simple divine essence is the subject of both paternity and filiation, then the divine essence begets itself. Why is that? Because that which begets the divine essence, the S-A-N of the beginning, would become
the S-A, that which begets the S-A-N of the. How does this is so bad? Okay, I'll let him complete it.
Prior to that which is begotten, and the being begotten also is the S-A-N, is the divine essence. So that would make the essence prior to itself, which according to Thomas in his presentation of the 5 ways is impossible. So the basic idea of the argument is this: okay, begetting.
This is so bad.
I don't even know what to say at this point.
The subject, the divine essence is the subject. This is what is what begets and what is begotten. Like this doesn't even seem like, from Dr. Nemesh, this doesn't even seem like an attempt. At all.
Lateran Fourth says divine essence is not the one begetting or begotten or spirated.
Yes, this is literally dogma. This is in the ecumenical council that St. Thomas commented on. See, the divine essence neither begets nor is begotten. And he's like, the divine essence begets and is begotten. Oh my gosh. He would say, oh, well, the Father's really identical to the divine essence, and the Son's really identical to the divine essence.
That's not
but it's like, this is, exactly. You're taking something materially and not formally.
Yeah.
This is like, again, the example that I brought forward earlier, 2 squared and the square root of 16. You don't say that the square root of 16 is like squared. Like, that would be ridiculous. Even though they're materially identical, they're considered under different formal aspects.
Yeah.
So it'd be ridiculous to say, oh, when you say 2 squared, you're actually doing a square root there. Like, and they're the exact same equation. Like, that's really bad. You're not doing that. But oh my goodness, this is just terrible.
It's crazy. Yeah.
Okay. It's almost like when he said, okay, they believe that the divine essence begets and is begotten. It's almost like he knew the language of Lateran 4, and he just like put in the condemned proposition of Lateran 4 just for lols. That's what it's. He's like, okay, let's take the dogmatically condemned statement, and let's say that that's actually what they believe. That would be really funny. Like, oh my gosh.
Joachim vindicated. So
Joachim, base Joachim. We love Joachim.
Yeah. Okay.
The begetting. What is it that begets? That's the divine essence, right? That's the thing in which the begetting.
Oh my goodness.
And what is begotten? Also the divine essence, because.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we have to continue.
That is the thing in which the relation of being begotten or filiation subsists. So then you have the same thing being prior to itself. And this is, of course, impossible. Now, I think, so that I think would be the easiest argument here to make.
Yeah, it would be the easiest because it's like, you think that like our theologians are a bunch of idiots and never thought through this stuff? Like, it's the easiest argument for a reason, because it's a bad argument.
Yeah.
I feel that I'm not explaining myself perfectly clearly, so I want to try to.
I know you're not explaining yourself perfectly. This is terrible.
Yeah, because you're not explaining at all.
He's just rage baiting. Dr. Nemesh is like, oh crap, I need to put out an episode to respond to this argument. What should I do? It's like, I just need to put something out there. And then he's just like, the Thomists believe that the divine essence is begets and is begotten. Yeah, literally, the condemned statement from the ecumenical council that St. Thomas commented on. That's crazy. Yeah, this has to be a troll. Yeah, Dr. Namesh is trolling us right now.
Again, to make sure that we're making something clear, Christian affirms in his video that the SA in and the SA odd are two aspects of a relation. Okay, SA in basically refers to what
balloons. That's so funny. He's getting trolled
affirms
so
in his video
hard.
that the SA in and the SA odd are two aspects of a relation.
Yes.
Okay, SA in basically refers to what is it that possesses the relation.
What? What?
Wait, what?
Dude, listen. This is what he thinks. This is the guy who's writing like books on scholastic philosophy. He doesn't even know what SA in and SA odd are. That's what you learn when you're reading the categories from Aristotle, the first book. You know, the first book that like in the Aristotelian corpus that you read through, like literally the basics, like the first year thing that you learn is about the 10 categories. This is crazy. This is your published academic for you. Oh my gosh. I hope none of his books sell. Okay, let's.
And the SA odd are two aspects of a relation. Okay, SA in basically refers to what is it that possesses the relation.
SA in is
what is it that possesses the relation? What does that even mean?
Oh no!
SA in is what is it that possesses the relation?
Dude, I'm glad that we're able to explain this like 14-year-olds on Discord, but this guy who's like a published author in the field has no idea what the frick he's talking about. This is crazy. Oh my gosh.
What is quality? Quality is that which quality possesses.
Quality is that which quality possesses.
That's what he said.
Yes, like when you talk about relation of quality, that's crazy. Imagine the implications of this if you actually held that was the SAN of a relation. That's insane.
Only disappointing. Yeah. Go on, play.
Okay.
In what does that relation subsist? So, for example, if I am the son of my father, the relation of affiliation of being a son that subsists in me. So the SA in is in me. Okay. Now, for the Thomist, the SA in of all the relations, paternity, filiation, active and passive spiration, the SA in of all those is the divine essence. One and the same divine essence, not a part of it, not this part or that part, but one and the same divine essence. Okay. Yeah. Now, if one and the same divine essence is the SA in of all these relations, then
think about SA in like the sort of existence, which is completely different than what he said.
The divine essence is the thing that begets. The divine essence is also the thing that is begotten, and that would make it.
No.
He's just doubling down on
He's doubling down. This is crazy.
Prior to itself, because what is begotten is subsequent to or posterior to what begets. So here I think you have the problem that you have basically the divine essence being prior to itself in virtue of these two relations, which imply relative priority or posteriority inhering in the divine essence.
Why did no one tell North Carolina drivers about this new rule? If you're driving less than 50 miles a day and you have automatic headlights, you can be paying so much less.
Yeah, then this here is sort of, he provided this summary, right?
You're welcome.
What he was arguing. So we can see that over here. And he does say in the video that the SA in is just identical to God's existence or God's essence.
Yeah.
So yeah, if the SA in of paternity, filiation, active spirit.
Yeah, SA in is just that in virtue of which something exists, basically. Like when we talk about the SA in of quality, for example, like it is the substance in which it subsists. But like he's basically, I think his confusion is he thinks that the in SA of like an accident actually functions the same exact way as the SA in of a relation. I think he might be confusing those two, but I literally have no idea what he's getting at. Oh, you're muted, Astro.
Okay. Wait, do you want me to say something?
No. I'm speculating of how he's confusing these two things.
Oh yeah,
do you have anything else to continue?
Honestly, no, I don't know how to interpret him because the way he seems to be understanding SAN seems to be like, oh, there's only like paternity exists, it doesn't have an SA in of its own, and then filiation exists, it doesn't have an SA in of its own, and then same for the spirit. What we're saying is that paternity has an SA in, filiation has an SA in, spirit has an SA in, but that those SANs are not opposed because SA in is relation insofar as it is in something, not toward something. Because it's in something and they're not opposed, so they must be one and the same. So of all three SANs, there is only one and the same thing, which is the divine essence. That's what Christian is saying. Not that all three lack SAN.
Real.
Also, he makes another mistake, and it's that like when we say SA odd, So SA odd is also identical to divine essence, because relation is identical to divine essence, and thus it means both aspects of relation is identical to divine essence. Otherwise, there would be composition. What we're saying is
which medieval said that like the affixing of relations were like affixed things. Is that Joachim?
No, Gilbert de la Porre, something
like
this.
Yeah.
He basically said that SA in is accidental, so it cannot exist in God. So there must only be SA odd. But St. Thomas and scholastics reply, well, no, whatever is accidental in creatures will be substantial in God. So no, relation does have SA in as well, but it's that it's just only identical to divine essence. So yeah, both SA in and SA odd are in fact identical to divine essence, because relation as a whole is identical to divine essence. What we're saying is that they have different functions. The function of one is to be in something. Now, in creatures, it is in something as an accident in a subject, but in God, it is in God as identified with his essence. And SA odd is the function of relation being a relative entity, referring to its correlative. So when you say fatherhood, you immediately conceive of a son. But the fatherhood has also SAM, meaning that that's the same relation insofar as it exists in the subject. So the same relation, it is identical to divine essence, SA and SA, both of them. But they have different functions insofar as one is the same relation insofar as it has a relation to divine essence, and the other one insofar as it's a relation to its correlative. Insofar as it has a relation to divine essence, there is no distinction between the Father and the Son, because the Father and the Son, insofar as they are God or have a relation to divine essence, are not opposed at all, because between fatherhood and divine essence and sonship and the divine essence, there is no opposition. So insofar as the relation has a is in something, is in the divine essence, there is no opposition between them. But insofar as they relate to each other, they have an opposition, because fatherhood and sonship cannot possibly be identified with one another. So that's what we mean. We don't mean that SA in is identical to divine essence, but SA odd is not identical to divine essence. Both are identical, but they have different functions, and that's how those functions enable us to distinguish these. So yeah, that's one misunderstanding again of what a relation is.
Yeah, so true.
Inspiration and past inspiration, if their SA in are all identical to God, then God is simultaneously like begetter and begotten, right?
Correct.
Which entails sort of what the argument you're making here. All right, and then we go to your fourth point.
Cambridge relations. Here we get into the analytic philosophy stuff.
One of the arguments that Christian makes why SA in, why relations with distinct SA odd could belong to the same subject, why they could have the same SA in.
Okay, so to my understanding, when it comes to Cambridge relations, these are basically like
relations of reason.
Extrinsic denominate. I thought it was extrinsically denominated properties.
As far as I know, they broadly like apply to all like relations of reason. So I think so. Yeah, that's how I've like known Cambridge property. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy that they think that relation basically that relation in its formal ratio is something which determines or modifies the subject. It's that would be imagine the implications of that. That would be completely crazy. What if your father was like zapped out of existence?
Yeah.
Would you just like cease to exist? Like your father zapped out of existence right now, would you just like cease to exist? Or do you just not have a real relation with your father? To your father, sorry. Yeah, that's
I'm wondering if he thinks that's related.
Oh, you got muted. At least pretend that you're not bored.
No, I wasn't speaking.
Oh, okay.
Is that relations do not modify their subjects. Okay, so that's one of his principal arguments. And
no, it's not that some relations don't modify their subjects. It's that relation by its very concept does not modify the subject, because its formal ratio is the SA ad. This is like the whole point of the proprioratio that I mentioned in the video. I assume that everybody got this when they were listening. and that's the formal aspect of a relation that that it be the order or habitude to the terminus, the order of the subject to the terminus. So this is the formal ratio. If you don't have this particular notion, then it's not a relation. So this just shows that even on like the most basic level, he didn't understand what I was saying. Okay.
Yeah.
I would say that some relations do.
Wait, sorry, what did you say? Didn't mean to cut you off. He's muted. Whatever. I'll continue.
Do not modify or determine their subjects, but other ones do.
I didn't say anything. Go on.
Some do and some don't. Okay, so you didn't understand anything I said. Okay, great.
Their subjects are called Cambridge relations in contemporary philosophy.
No, you just don't know what you're talking about.
For example, if say somebody is thinking about me, okay, my being thought about.
This is oh my gosh, does he think that I'm talking about logical relations? Oh my gosh. Because that's like an extrinsic denomination is being looked at or being sensed or being known. That's called an extrinsic denomination. That's like how, for example, we think about our relation with God. Is we're really related to God, but God is not really related to us.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, my son's crying for some reason. Yap about something, Astro. Yap about how bad this is, and I'll be back in a second.
Person, or am I being the object of that person?
Okay.
Just yap, bro. I need to check.
Yeah. So. Okay. That's fine. So what Christians said, basically there are some relations which are only of reason and some are real relations. So relations of Trinity are real relations, but relations like God has to creatures, those are merely logical ones. So that's why God never changes when he creates. So we say that God wasn't eternally the creator, but temporally. So predicate creator is predicated of God when there is an actual creation. Because if there is no creation, then there is no creator. There's only God who hasn't created. Because in order to be a creator, you must create something, right? So you cannot say that God exists. God is the creator if there is no creation. So God would simply exist, but he wouldn't be termed creator. Okay, he would only be termed creator if there's creation. But since it's a relation of reason, that's why God can have it at a certain point. Like we could predicate of God temporally, and it posits no change in God because it's a relation of reason. It's not really in God, but only in our way of thinking that it is really in God, basically. So it makes no change on the part of God, but only on the part of creature. That's why all of these temporal relations that I've got, like creator, Lord, they are set temporally, yet they posit no change in them because they're relations of reason, not real relations.
Yeah, so he actually thinks that we only think that there's a relation of reason between the persons. That's crazy.
I think he's saying that. Let's read. So some relations.
Some relations do not determine their subjects. For example, Cambridge relations, but others do. Being thought about by someone else doesn't modify the person being thought about, but being burned or being insulted does. If paternity and filiation are not to determine the divine essence, then they are like Cambridge relations. Yes, he literally thinks that these are relations of reason. This undermines the reality of the distinct persons. Yeah, which is why we think that they're real relations. Yeah. St. Thomas argues that calling things the same only rules out real distinction if numeric sameness is meant. But if that's not what's meant in the case of identity of the real relations, the divine essence, then there is multiplicity in God. Okay, so same misunderstanding that we talked about earlier when it comes to simplicity.
Nobody believes that like divine relations modify the divine, as if like they're essential constituent of the divine nature. Rather, they're modes or terms by which divine essence seeks to be terminated and diffused. That's what we mean when we say there are these relations. They do not pertain to the concept of divinity insofar as they are essential constituents of God, like essential attributes, but rather they're modes or terms by which divine essence is diffused or terminated by these operations of intellectual relation. So once again, like it's wrong to say, oh, if they do not determine it, then they're Cambridge. Well, you're just misunderstanding what determination is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, he thinks that being cut or burned is this is hilarious because this is like
I don't know.
This is like an extremely like midwit reading, but he thinks being cut or burned is a relation. That's the category of passion. This is. I mean, passion can be action, and passion can be the foundation, which I talked about in that video. The foundation for a relation, but it's not a relation.
Yeah, it's not a relation.
Yeah.
Yeah, me moving a cup is not a relation. It's an action.
Bro, getting burned is a relation. Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. So I see that. No. Okay, let's continue. Let's continue. This is really bad, but we still have 20 minutes left.
Thought does not modify me. There's nothing, that's made different about me. There's nothing in me, that is affected or changed by my becoming a person that someone else thinks about. So if you go from not thinking about me to thinking about me, there's nothing that changes in me. I just have this Cambridge relation of being the person that you're thinking about. But there are other sorts of relations that do. So for example, if I am being, let's say, killed by you or stabbed by you or insulted by you,
that
does
not
imply that something is.
How does he think this is a relation? This is. I would if somebody wanted me to tutor them and they didn't know, they thought that a passion like this was a relation, I would make them read more before I tutored them. Stephen Nimesh, I wouldn't even allow myself to tutor him because he wouldn't know what he's talking. He wouldn't have the foundational principles for me to tutor him on this subject. This is crazy.
Happening in me. Right? The reason why I am the one being killed is because my body is undergoing death and not someone else's. The reason why I'm the one being insulted is because my inner life is having a certain episode and not someone else's. So there are some relations that do not imply a change or a modification or anything in their subjects, but some relations do imply that. Now,
no, it doesn't. Relation as such doesn't. This is simple. This is basic.
Trinity and filiation do not modify that it's a divine essence. Then they become Cambridge relations. Okay, they're like the same sort of relation as being thought about.
Yeah, this is brain dead.
Or being referred to by someone.
Brain dead.
But this undermines the reality of the distinct persons because
of course it does, which is why St. Thomas says they're real relations, which you would know if you actually read any of the books.
Cambridge relations
before writing a freaking book on this.
Produce, a real object. They don't produce a real terminus. I can think about things that don't exist. I can refer to people that are not alive anymore. So, in the same way, if paternity and filiation and so on are supposed to be relations which do not modify their subject, then they're Cambridge relations. And if Cambridge relations don't produce a real terminus, in that case, there is no real distinction between father and son. Nothing is really produced.
Oh my gosh.
By the paternity, if it's Cambridge relation. No one is really begotten if the filiation is a Cambridge relation.
Yeah,
says,
he just says absolutely no idea what he's talking about. He's just going to make it mad.
In relation to the
The bad news, perfect work-life balance might be a myth. The good news, you can use AI to optimize your schedule, keeping you well ahead your deadlines, so you can finally relax.
Stephen Nimesh, why do you have so many freaking ads on your videos? Okay, so now I'm talking again. They're going to critique me again. Okay. Yeah, essay ad. Look, I have it right here. Essay ad does not modify subject, thus properly in God. I literally have this on the screen that they're showing right now, what essay ad is.
This relation does not modify the subject. That's not always true. All right.
No, this is always true. This is always true. If you know literally anything about what you're talking about, this is always true. Passion, this is like an infantile mistake that I would expect from a first-year philosophy student.
Yeah.
And even then I would get mad at them for saying this. Who thinks passion is a relation? This is...
Yeah, we should ask...
This is so completely... You wrote a book about this, and you don't know this?
Does he honestly think that formal constituent of a relation is essay in?
Yes. Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Which is why he thinks that... Which is why we were talking about essay ad earlier.
Then how's relation different from quality, quantity, blah blah blah? Because
he doesn't know. He hasn't even asked these questions for himself.
Oh my goodness. That's why relation is unique, because its formal constituent is that it is towards something, not in something, like quality, quantity. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what to say.
I'm so pained right now. This is pain to my Roman soul right now. Okay.
Yeah.
My Aryan spirit is turbulent within me. Oh man, I need to joke about this so I can continue.
Because, for example, if I'm, or at the very least, a relation does not always, how should I put this?
Yap. Yeah.
Relation does not always imply something about the subject, but sometimes it does. So, for example, if I'm thinking about you, that doesn't imply anything about you. It doesn't change you to be thought about by me. So there's a relation there. You're the thing that I'm thinking about. But some relations are not like that. So, for example, if I strike you, right, or if I attack you, that does do something to you. Or if I'm heavier than you, that does imply something about you.
Passion's not relation.
What?
How's
attacking your relation?
How does being heavier too? How does being heavier not
my
imply some sort of real relation? Because so he thinks that like being greater in quantity is a like relation of reason. That's crazy. So he thinks that me being heavier than you doesn't mean that you're lighter than me. That's what he. Oh my gosh! I literally go over this in the video too because I knew that people needed a introduction to relations, so I went over how quantity can be the foundation for a real relation, and how these are correlative, so they imply each other when it's based on quantity. That's total Wagner frustration. Yeah, I'm so frustrated right now. This is frustrating me so much. I put so much love and care and effort into crafting something like this. And yeah, I expect to be misunderstood by your average person. You know, they watch and they're like, okay, I didn't understand this. Did you mean this? I'm like, hey, I clarify it. And I'm like, hey, as long as you're not like a jerk about it, I'll clarify it, whatever, and we're all happy. We're all good. We're all fine. But then you have somebody who's like writing books in a professional way, spreading their wicked blasphemies like Stephen Nimesh does. And Nimesh is spreading his errors against the faith. I mean, it's for Dr. Andani, it's different because he's not a professed baptized Christian. But Nimesh, I'm assuming, is a baptized Christian, spreading just wicked heresy everywhere. And he doesn't even know the basics about this. And he just makes the most, I'm going to say it. I haven't pulled out the R word yet in this video yet, but he makes the most retarded arguments and has the most retarded misunderstandings. And yeah, sure, he was nice to me in the video or whatever, but honestly, like, okay, that's great that you're nice to me when you're reviewing my stuff, but I don't care if you're mean to me as long as you represent me correctly. Like, I don't care about being nice to me. Okay, it took me 3 hours to call this retarded. Okay. Let's get back into it. I mean, this is just a fact behind it. I mean, this is just the reality. Is that somebody like him who's writing books in this way? I mean, they're supposed to be held to a higher standard.
Yeah,
according to sacred scripture and sacred tradition, people like this are held to a higher standard. So if they say things like this just shows basic lack of understanding of very simple points of what they're attempting to publicly teach on, refute, make money from. I mean, these people should be judged very harshly for what they're saying.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm crashing out right now. You're right. I'm crashing out. You have anything to say, Astro, or should we continue?
No, it's just that as you're talking, there's a bass nasheed being played in the background of my house, but you cannot hear it.
Dude, I love the nasheed.
Yeah.
Is it nasheedim as the plural?
I don't know. I don't even know what it means, basically.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not Arab, so.
Yeah, I forgot. You're Persian.
Cannot have, so this whole point is that not all relations are like this. Some relations are of the sort that they don't modify their subjects, but some relations are.
No, that's okay. That's not what a logical. That's not the difference between a real and logical relation, but
relations in the modern philosophy are the sort that do not imply or modify their subjects.
Yeah. Okay. Great. You decided to read a treatment of a 13th century scholastic theology through your tenuous grasp of modern philosophy. That is amazing. Okay. Thank you for that.
Okay. But even a Cambridge relation always implies that some other thing has some real property. So we'll talk about that again later. But
right. Yeah. So when it says like order to terminus, right? So like the essay ad is to do with like being ordered to another. So there has to be another.
Right.
To affirm it.
They're correlative. Yes. Correlative. When you read category 7, correlative is one of the properties of relation. Yes, exactly. I went over this. Yes.
And right. I don't see the Thomistic divine, absolutely simple divine essence. It just doesn't have the resources to provide another. Right.
But the other is the terminus of the relation. That's what the other is. Goodness. And they're really distinct by relative opposition. There's nothing to say that they can't share the same essay in. That's the whole point of the video.
Yeah. What do you mean there is no fact? I mean, generative action produces a word, and the word is between the word and the producer, the real relations of paternity and filiation. I mean, we can get into that why it's called generative action, but that doesn't even matter because here they're missing the basics, right? So yes, there's a order determinist because there is another thing which is produced, and that's the son, and there's a producer which is the father. So of course there's a real relation between them, and of course SA odd is father's order to the son. So why are we asking if there's no other when we have already provided where this other comes from? And the foundation is already given. The foundation of relation is already given in Christian's video. So I don't know why this keeps brought up. Just really annoying.
Okay. 50, a little bit over 50%. That I'm gonna make it to the end.
Correct. Yeah, because it's just a simple divine essence. That's all there is.
Yeah. That's the problem. And to talk about the divine essence being ordered to itself as the ordering to another, I mean, that's just absurd. It would,
right. Exactly. Because they'll say, and this is what Thomas seems to say in that quote that I had earlier about Boethius, self relations are not real relations. They're strictly logical or conceptual. They're relations that we make with our mind, like when we say that everything is identical to itself. But that's not a relation to something else, and it's not a real relation for these guys either. A real relation has something else, right? It's a relation to something else. It implies a real distinction.
Does he think that? Does he think that the divine essence is the subject of the relations? This is why he thinks that.
I mean, he said
God
the
begets
divine
God.
essence. Divine essence is order to itself, which is once again missing the whole point, because the moment you say divine essence is order toward divine essence, that means that you have basically missed the point of what a relation is. Because the moment you say divine essence is order to itself, you're confusing relations SA in with SA out, because we already said SA in is relation insofar as it is in the divine essence, but SA out is relation insofar as it relates to its correlative. So at the moment you say divine essence is order to itself, that shows that you're going from relations SA out to relations SA in. So you're switching SA out to SA in, and basically make an invalid argument. This is a problem with all Muslim arguments. They say Father is the essence, Son is the essence, Father and Son are opposed, therefore divine essence is opposed to divine essence. It doesn't follow, because Father and Son, insofar as they're related to the divine essence, are not distinguished at all. So we were not even allowed to make that claim, because insofar as they have a relation to divine essence, they're not distinguished because there's no opposition. That's why we say that Father and the Son are the same under absolute concept, but they're distinguished under the relative concept. So once again, missing what SA in and SA out is. And this is the root of every single opponent of Trinity. They do not understand what a relation is. That's the whole thing.
Okay. 10 minutes.
And so, when he says that relations don't modify their subjects, this is like certain kinds of relations don't modify their subjects, but not all of them, right? And filiation or paternity certainly do. In your sense of those words, anyway.
I'm going to skip it to here. So this is sort of, he applies this framework now of relations, real relations, SA odd, SA in. He applies the Father and Son, and then you'll see what he says.
Which is the relation of the Father to the Word.
Okay. Yeah. Again, look at this. Look at this beautiful. Look at this absolutely beautiful outline that I give to these people for them to.
Listing your house on the market isn't the only way to sell your house. Selling to us is much faster.
SA odd to be distinct.
Oh wait.
So I mean, my objection to this would be that if the SA in of two relations are absolutely identical, then in order for their SA odd to be distinct, you have to presuppose a genuine other to make the SA odds distinct. And I don't see how
this is the foundation for the production of the term by the processions. This was the whole point that I brought this in
but
after
generative
procession.
action. It's so simple. Okay, listen. There's a generative action. There's a generator who's the Father, and he generates. So there's a Son. Father and the Son are related to each other. So Father's SA odd refers to the Son. Son's SA odd refers to the Father. Where's the other question? That's the answer to where's the other question. And the reason this exists is because there's a generative action, and a relation as such results from action. So in our way of thinking, these are rooted in that. So I don't know why you're asking for it when Christian explained it 10 times in the original video.
I don't know. I don't read Dale Tuggy. So I don't really
Who
care
cares
about
about
what he has
Dale
to say.
Tuggy?
And provide that to us. What is the genuine other that will make the essay odd distinct? By virtue of what is the essay odd of the Father and the
Okay, I'm
Son
gonna.
distinct?
I've already explained this a million times, so I will let it
Because
play.
their essay in are identical. So we can't appeal to the essay in to explain why there are two distinct essay
That's why
odd.
we need a foundation.
We have to
That's why we
appeal
need
to
a
something
foundation.
else, right? To account for why the Father and the Son have distinct essay odd. And the appeal here seems to be, well, the essay odd are distinct because the Father is not the Son. But you're trying to, like, the Father not being the Son is what you are explaining by resort to distinct essay odd. So to me,
this is all the reduction of
that's the problem. It's sort of for a free lunch.
So no. Okay, asking for a free lunch. This was the asking for the free lunch argument that you guys were mentioning.
Yeah.
This is why we have foundation for relation. Relation doesn't just pop out of nowhere. This is the whole point of having the eternal processions.
I think there's something strange about the way that Christian phrases things. Okay, so he says that it's not contradictory to have two relations with the same essay in. That's obviously true. For example, I can be a brother and a father, right? Those relations are both in me. So there's nothing impossible about that. But can you have one and the same thing be the subject of relations that imply opposition or whatever you want to call it, difference? Right?
Does he think the same subject? Do you think? Do you think that the subject of the Father and the subject does he not know enough about Trinitarian theology to know that subjectivity is unique to the persons?
Right. So the Father is something other than what he begets. Right. A father is the Father is the father of a son, or an offspring, and an offspring is the offspring of a father. So can you have two relations which imply differentiation, both applying to the same thing? That's the real question. Not
that's tragic. I'm sorry. That's tragic.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
The voice
provide an
breaking is
argument
tragic.
why we cannot. I want
That's
an
tragic.
argument as to why it's impossible.
Sorry, what'd you say?
No, I said I want an argument why it's impossible, because he just keeps saying, "Oh, but how? But how?" Well, asking questions is not an argument.
Yeah, exactly.
Relations with distinct essay odd and the same essay in. In a sense, yeah, that seems obvious. Like, there's nothing impossible about that. But can you have two relations which seem to exclude each other? Oppositional.
Seem to exclude each other. Why do they exclude each other in their SAN? Because if you're pointing to opposition follows from the essay odd of a relation, which is the whole point of making the distinction in the first place. Yeah. So it's excluded. It's excluded in the aspect of its essay odd. That's the whole point of making. That's the whole point of relation. Yeah. This is why relation doesn't multiply the Trinity. This is the whole point of bringing it forward. They're saying, well, their essay odd distinguishes them and formally constitutes the relation, and therefore they can't have the same SAN. You're just stating the fact that you think it's contradictory. You're not making an argument.
Opposite. So I don't know the scholastic terminology, but that seemed to
I know you don't know it.
That seemed to imply differentiation with respect to essay odd.
It's relative opposition. That's the term.
In the same
relative oppositions of the essay odd, because it's relative opposition of relation, which is formally constituted by essay odd.
Mm-hmm. But let him finish it, and then we'll give a final.
Not only it seems to imply differentiation with respect to essay odd in the same essay in. Not only differentiation in general, but differentiation to each other. Right. So the Father is the father of a son. The Son is the son of a father. Right. A father cannot be the same thing as a son. Otherwise, there is no paternity and filiation. But how can I be the one thing that is both father and son? The father of this son and the son of that father. That's what's the impossibility. That's what is the contradiction, because the essay out here implies differentiation, and by identifying them in terms of essay in, there is no differentiation made at all. So the two relations imply difference, but I'm trying to say that one and the same thing is the subject of both of those relations. That's where the contradiction and the impossibility lies.
No, this is all wrong. Astro, do you want to go into it?
Oh yeah, okay. So he just doesn't get what an essay in is. Okay. So let's talk about three personal relations. Okay, there's fatherhood, sonship, filiation. Fatherhood, sonship, and passive spiration, okay, or the Holy Spirit's property, personal relation. So that means there are three essay ins and three essay outs. Okay, so far so clear, because there are three personal relations, and there's three essay ins and three essay outs. Now, what is essay in? Essay in is relation insofar as it is in something. Now, let's consider this. We have said that there are three essay ins. Now, is the essay in of the Son and essay in of the Father opposed? No, because they are in the same thing. So insofar as their essay ins are considered, they're not opposed at all. So essay in cannot provide the distinction, because essay in is relation not insofar as it's a relation, but insofar as it's an accident subsisting in a subject. Okay, so relation subsists as an accident in the subject. Okay, in creatures, but in God it is identical with the substance. So there's no composition in that sense in God, but in creatures there is. So SA-ins. So there are three SA-ins in the Trinity, and none of them are opposed to one another because SA-in is the respect to divine essence, and none of them are opposed to divine essence. So their SA-ins are common, and that cannot provide a differentiation. Now, SA-odd is not about relation as it is in the divine essence, but relation as it is a relation or a relative entity which relates to its correlative. In this sense, fatherhood is necessarily opposed to the sonship, and both of them are opposed to the Holy Spirit by virtue of active spiration. So in their SA-odds, they are opposed. So three SA-odds are opposed to each other, but three SA-ins are not opposed to each other, because SA-ins is relation insofar as it is in something, and they're all in the same thing and are identical with it, namely the divine essence. Thus, their SA-ins does not provide the distinction, because all three SA-ins have one and the same thing, which is divine essence, with which they're identical, but their SA-odds are opposed, because SA-odd is relation insofar as it's relation, or insofar as it's a relative entity. Now, fatherhood, insofar as he's the father, is opposed to the son, but insofar as he's God, he's not opposed to the son, because the son also, insofar as he's God, are one and the same God, which is the SA-in. So that's how relation, although it has three SA-ins, is not distinguished, but insofar as it has three SA-odds, is opposed and distinguished. That's because relation is constituted by its SA-odd, not by its SA-in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. We have 5 minutes to go.
Let's just not stop. Let's just keep it going.
Let's just keep it going.
And someone said I can be a father and son at the same time. Yeah, we're not disputing that. You can be a father and son at the same time, but what makes you a father is something external to you, namely your father. Sorry, what makes you a father is something external to you, namely your son, and what makes you a son is also something external to you, namely your father. So, like, there's an appeal to the case of you, Stephen. We have to appeal to two entities that are external to you.
Money, I'm a flex. I get that money, I'm a flex. I get that money, I'm a flex.
Right? But when it comes to like God, the Trinity, how God is Father and He is Son, I can't make an appeal to anything outside the Trinity to have these two distinct SA-odd. And to me,
you can't appeal to anything outside of the divine essence specifically.
Yeah, I cannot appeal outside the divine essence. So I cannot appeal to the Father and the Son being distinct to explain why the SA-odd is distinct, because that would sort of be getting the whole thing backwards, right? The oneness has to appeal to the SA-odd being distinct to establish why the Father and the Son are distinct.
From procession.
So correct. I have to get going. So Stephen, overall, do you have any sort of? I think we got through most of what you wanted to say. Yeah. Do you have any sort of final remarks about Thomist Trinity, and maybe recommend something for our audience to read of yours where you sort of talked about this?
Yeah, I think there are a few things I would recommend. In the first place, I have every now and again interaction with people who are into scholastic philosophy, and it's almost impossible to talk with them because they use technical terminology that they don't explain. Right? I am aware that in philosophy and in theology, there are technical terminologies that you use in certain fields. For example, I study phenomenology, and for many people,
you literally are writing books on this and doing videos about this. How do you not understand the terminology?
Phenomenology is totally incomprehensible until you learn what the words means and how to use them, and then all of a sudden it becomes clear. So I don't doubt that for people who talk this way all the time, scholastic terminology can be clear to them, but to people on the outside, it's incomprehensible. And I've also found that it's actually not difficult to take that technical apparatus, that technical terminology, and to put it into ordinary English. And
what I did in this video is I explained each one of the terms that I was using throughout the video. That's what I did. So your average educated person should be able to understand everything I said here, which is from experience. We know, because explanations like this, videos like this, there are many people out there who are average educated individuals who understand what's going on. I mean, for some people, it might be a little bit more difficult. It might take a few watch throughs or maybe a more careful listen. For other people, they can understand it. But yeah,
I try to do that in my own work. So the first thing that I would recommend for Christian, but especially his
for me, what you're giving recommendations to me? No thanks, buddy. I don't need your recommendations. Okay, you can keep your recommendations. I don't need your recommendations.
His fans and appreciators who like scholastic philosophy, you need to learn how to talk about these things in ways that are simpler and without using the technical apparatus. And it's perfectly possible because, of course, we're all talking about the real world. We're talking about real things that are out there. So you can always find normal, natural language to talk about the same things. You don't have to use the terminology. And that would probably make your solutions more appealing to others, more interesting to others, invite more conversation. The second thing I want to say is that it seems to me, at the end of the day, Thomas also in the Summa Theologiae, in a couple places in these questions and articles where he talks about the Trinity, he makes every now and again the concession that the words being used are not used in the ordinary sense, right? So person is not used in the ordinary sense when applied to God.
It's not being used in the sense in which we ordinarily use it among men. Yes. Okay, great.
Relation is not used in the ordinary sense when applied to God. I think it would be more honest and less, bullcrappy, so to speak, if you were to just say, listen, the Trinity is something that we don't understand. We don't have the right word.
Shut up. That's just so retarded. That's just so stupid. Yeah, just shut up. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we don't use words in a univocal sense when we speak about God and creatures. So it's bullcrap to actually use these terms. No, we keep the formal ratio of the thing in the mode of the mode or manner of speaking. That is what we're abstracting from, because those imply created imperfections. Or do I need to stop being so technical by using the term created imperfections? Is that too technical or something? Okay, shut up. I mean, that's just, yeah, that was just terrible. Okay, yeah, okay, yeah. Try normal language with literally any other science. Yeah. Please, can you go and explain to me and do that paper that you just did in astrophysics? Could you do that in ordinary, normal human language? It might be more appealing for all the people out there who want to read some light astrophysics. Okay.
Yeah. Can you explain those in layman terms, like those mathematical equations that happen in astrophysics? Can you explain that to me?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is it.
Yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Yeah.
Anyways, you guys have a fantastic evening. I'm sure Astro has to go to bed.
I mean, it's only 11 p.m., but yeah. I mean, I have a headache, so,
Bro needs to go to bed. Get your sleep, bro. Get your sleep. Okay, thank you everybody for watching. This was way longer than I expected, but I hope that you guys learned some stuff. This was just very annoying and in many ways very frustrating.
Yeah.
Especially, from yeah. Okay. Anyways, you guys have a nice one, and as always, God bless.